American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 561 to 580. Dong, dong, dong. Accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps. 3 tall figures wearing power armor rushed out of the warp gate one after another. This almost unbearable air pollution is definitely a forge world. At this moment, Wild Wolf Rourke, wearing a metal helmet, subconsciously raised his head and sniffed. He turned his head and said in a deep voice to the Primarch Rourke and Cypher Rourke beside him. "Tisk, did you need to say that?" Lord Cypher couldn't help but chuckle. He raised a hand covered in ceramite armor and pointed casually. Among the many manufacturing factories several kilometers away, a large group of Adeptus Mechanicus Skitarii Rangers wearing Martian breathers and red robes over gray armor were rushing towards them. "Aha, it's time for our respected Primarch to come forward. I just don't know if this identity will work. Don't get locked up and beaten up." Wild Wolf Rourke shook his metal helmet. He teased Primarch Rourke in a gloating tone. "Well, if the local psychers and priests aren't blind, they can definitely confirm my Primarch identity. I'll have the Skitarii execute you later." As soon as he finished speaking, Primarch Rourke casually took off his Ormite helmet and tucked it under his arm. At the same time, he also retorted to Wild Wolf Rourke without showing any weakness. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Soon after, a series of arc rifles emitting a low buzz quickly aimed at the 3 tall figures who had been standing still. After all, they were here to ask for help, and it would be difficult to solve the problem if a conflict broke out. "I am the 22nd Gene Seed Primarch of the Human Imperium. I demand to see your Forge General and have the priests and psychers verify my identity." At this moment, Rourke, driving the Ormite power armor, slowly stepped forward. He said loudly to the surrounding Skitarii Rangers in a loud voice. The Skitarii Rangers who heard Primarch Rourke's words were obviously stunned for a moment. They then used the communication channel to carry out extremely rapid information transmission. After all, no one had ever encountered a Gene Seed Primarch coming to their doorstep. If the opposite side was fake, it would be fine, it would just cost some manpower to destroy them. But if it was real, a mere forge world could not bear the terrible crime of killing a Primarch. "Please follow me, and please remain restrained and do not make any movements that arouse our vigilance." Before long, a Skitarii Ranger captain seemed to have received some orders. He stepped forward without hesitation and said lightly to the 3 tall figures in front of him. Primarch Rourke exchanged glances with the other 2, and everyone nodded in agreement without hesitation. About 10 minutes later, Rourke and the others were led to a state church nestled among a large number of manufacturing factories. At the same time, Primarch Rourke and Wild Wolf Rourke keenly sensed the slight movements of a large number of Skitarii and heavy vehicles gradually surrounding the entire church building. "Tisk tisk, it seems that the Oilers here are very cautious, and they don't seem like they're going to have a civil war. Could it be that our purpose here is really just to fool them into giving us a few sets of power armor?" Wild Wolf Rourke, grinning, casually took off his metal helmet. He shook his gray-white hair that was emitting heat and said to Cypher Rourke, who was admiring the interior decorations of the church. "Let's see what happens. If nothing major happens, it would be a great achievement to get you a master-class power armor and get some vehicle samples or design blueprints for the Primarch." Cypher Rourke said without turning his head. Dong, dong, dong. At this moment, the slightly heavy footsteps made the 3 people standing in place immediately turn their heads to look. 2 tall Castellan robots escorted a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus in red robes, along with a state church priest and several psychers. One may be from the Dark Angels chapter. The power armor worn by one of them is of unknown forging material, but judging from the use of the Xenos scythe weapon, he may be from the Deathwatch. As for the one carrying the greatsword weapon, I have no impression for the time being. The tech priest wearing a breather said bluntly to the people in front of him. "Astartes, although the priests and psychers have not detected any signs of activity of demons or warp power, we still have too many doubts about your true identities. If you don't want to cause a large-scale conflict, I personally can pretend that I have never heard of the Gene Seed Primarch topic. But if it's convenient, can you tell us your true purpose for coming here?" Hearing the other party's cold words, Primarch Rourke, frowning slightly, stepped forward, driving the Ormite power armor. He lowered his head slightly and looked down at the tech priest and asked, "Putting aside other things, hasn't your forge world encountered any wars or difficult problems to solve recently? Apart from those unresolved technological barriers, the only problem at present is your arrival." Since you have not caused any losses to the Forge world, nor have you shown any bad attitude, I personally can allow you to leave here safely. After all, I have long heard of the Dark Angels chapter, and Griffin IV does not want to offend a newly founded Astartes chapter. Facing the metal giant close at hand, the tech priest, without any emotional fluctuations, said to Primarch Rourke without fear. Just as Primarch Rourke was about to continue speaking, Wild Wolf Rourke, who couldn't help but shake his head, suddenly stepped forward. He grinned and said loudly to the tech priest, "Those two are too long-winded. We came here to find a master-class power armor. If you don't have one, a finely crafted power armor will also work. As long as you help us, it will be considered that you owe Griffin IV a favor. In the future, if you encounter any major problems that are difficult to solve, we will also lend a helping hand. You see, it's that simple." Wild Wolf Rourke told the other party everything in a few words. A mechanical sound of gears turning faintly came from the body of the tech priest. Then, he first glanced at the expressionless Primarch Rourke, and then placed his gaze on Wild Wolf Rourke. "Perhaps you have misunderstood one thing. Griffin IV does not produce power armor, and no Astartes would specifically run to a Forge world to find master-class power armor. However, in order to calm things down as soon as possible, if you only want power armor, I personally can give you a set of finely crafted power armor made of Lucius's Sunfire alloy from my collection. The only condition is that I hope you can leave this place immediately." At this moment, before Primarch Rourke could speak, Wild Wolf Rourke, grinning, quickly stepped forward. He extended a metal hand to the tech priest in front of him. "Haha, deal. As long as the power armor is in hand, we will leave immediately." If the Primarch Roche had arrived at any Astartes chapter, even if facing a Chaos Warband, he would be the most honored guest or a worthy enemy. But alas, this time they had come to a Forge world belonging to the Adeptus Mechanicus. These oily old men were not Astartes bound by blood, especially the way Roche and the others arrived and the identities they revealed. It filled their stubborn minds with doubt and suspicion. Moreover, even if the oily old men revered rationality, there were still many twists and turns within their heavily modified mechanical bodies. Just like the tech priest whose name was unknown before them, he completely dispelled the fierce conflict that might have erupted between the two sides with just a few words and a suit of artificer power armor as the price. Instead of drawing swords at the slightest disagreement, spending a lot of resources and manpower to eliminate 3 Astartes of unknown origin who could cause major accidents, it would be better to quietly pay a fraction of the resources and directly send the other party away from the Forge world. Regarding the development of this matter, Primarch Roche, with a slight frown, and Sef Roche, shaking his head and sighing, did not object. Since the other party regarded them as plague gods, and there were no signs of war here, then why bother sticking to the oily old men's metal asses? Just as the tech priest turned around to order several psychers to transmit information outwards. Wait, Sef Roche, seemingly noticing something, suddenly activated his power armor and stepped forward. He walked straight towards a younger-looking psyker, and amidst the sudden increase in vigilance from the surrounding people, he asked, "Do you psychers feel that it is more difficult to use your psychic powers? Or have you experienced other special reactions in your bodies, such as splitting headaches?" The young psyker hesitated slightly. He then turned his gaze to the tech priest. "You may answer the question, and I would also like to know why this is." The tech priest nodded indifferently. Having obtained permission, the young psyker quickly took a deep breath. He looked up at Sef Roche's face and said with a wry smile, "Honorable Astartes, the problems you mentioned do exist. Roughly starting from last night, many psychers unexpectedly felt a sense of suffocation, like the illusion of drowning. And after our very careful observation, this situation seemed to disappear in the morning, so it is not a sign of psychic instability, only occasional headaches, but we can continue to endure it with our faith in the Omnisaea and the Emperor." At this moment, after listening to the other party's words, Sef Roche slightly turned his head. A pair of eyes filled with solemn expression stared in the direction of Primarch Roche. "Brothers, we're really in trouble now. Yes, let's hope it's not what I'm thinking." Primarch Roche, whose expression also became solemn, once again activated his power armor and stepped forward. He did not continue to hide it, but instead spoke unceremoniously to the tech priest in a deep voice. "Immediately activate all of your large-scale long-range astropathic arrays. Also, find the astropaths in the choir of the Astronomicon to conduct large-scale psychic scans. Go now. Wait a moment. At this moment, the tech priest wearing a respirator suddenly raised a mechanical arm. He looked up at Primarch Roche, whose aura was gradually rising, and asked once again. What exactly is happening that makes you so wary? We on Griffin IV have a complete regiment of the Astra Militarum, countless Adeptus Arbits and heavy vehicles, as well as a Titan Legion and 2 Knight Houses, so no matter what kind of enemy we face, we can achieve glorious victory. Hey, at this moment, Primarch Roche looked down at the other party from a high position, and couldn't help but let out a sneer. He spoke almost word by word to the tech priest in a deep voice. If our judgment is not mistaken, the only explanation for why your psychers have developed this situation is the Tyranid Hive fleet is here, and it's the most terrifying main tendril, and you actually want to resist with just a Forge World. I have to admire your courage and loyalty, but despise your stupidity and stubbornness. Dash 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 dash. As time continued to pass, the large-scale astropathic arrays and psychic scans of the choir of the Astronomicon on the Griffin IV Forge World were quickly activated. However, the many bad news that followed further confirmed Roche and the others' guess. A large amount of psychic communication throughout the star sector was severely disrupted, and long-range psychic communication that could cross star sectors was completely cut off. And after several astropaths who continued to conduct psychic scans basically fell into a state of madness. The Adeptus Mechanicus command hierarchy on Griffin IV finally reacted. That was, a massive Tyranid Hive fleet had actually come towards the Forge World. However, facing such a serious situation, these extremely stubborn oily old men once again rejected the suggestions made by Roche and the others. The idea proposed by Roche and them was to first strategically transfer the most valuable technology and even the countless ordinary people who attracted the Hive fleet, leaving only all the combat forces to carry out a desperate counterattack to see if they could defend the Forge World from the terrifying Tyranid tide. Unfortunately, without the strong support of the Astartes, Roche and the others, who could not prove their Primarch identity, could not obtain the command authority of the entire Forge World at all. However, seeing that they had discovered the enemy's tracks for the Forge World and made a significant contribution, the oily old men also told Roche and the others, if they were willing to help the Forge World resist the Tyranid fleet, then a complete regiment of the Astra Militarum could be handed over to them for personal command. After all, under the leadership of the Astartes, the Astra Militarum soldiers responsible for confronting the Tyranid tide might burst out with great morale. Faced with this situation, Wild Wolf Roche, who had just obtained the Artificer Power Armor, immediately replied with an insulting Fenrisian word. Even SEF Roche was preparing to use the Webway beacon, intending to summon a Webway portal and leave. But only Primarch Roche hesitated slightly, and then unhesitatingly agreed to the oily old men's request. However, he also put forward new conditions. That was that all resources in the Forge World's Skitarii legions could be mobilized by him at will. And the oily old men weighed the specific gains and losses, and decided to believe in Primarch Rock's choice once. I say, dear Primarch, are you crazy? There are only 3 of us here now. Not a single Astartes chapter. Even if you summon the Carcharodons and the other chapters, a few thousand Astartes are not enough for the bugs to eat. Wild Wolf Roche, wearing a suit of dark red Artificer Power Armor on his tall body, stared straight at Primarch Roche. He bared his teeth and roared loudly at the other party. I also know that this is your important duty as a Primarch, but can you look at the current situation? These damn oily old men don't trust us at all. They just want us to lead the Astra Militarum mortals to fill the lines. What? Are you afraid, you little wolf cub? Now that your power armor has arrived, I don't intend to force you to stay, you can choose to leave with SEF. At this moment, Roche, who was carefully observing the Forge World map, said without even raising his head. Afraid, that word isn't in my dictionary. At that moment, upon hearing Roche's sarcastic words, Wolf Roche immediately became infuriated. He quickly drove his masterwork power armor to Roche's desk. A ceramite steel hand slammed heavily onto the ancient world map. Fine, I can indulge your madness to the end, but what exactly do you plan to do? Are you really going to lead mortal soldiers to gamble with the bugs? As Wolf Roche's words fell, Roche, clad in adamantium power armor, slowly stood up. He raised a hand and lightly snapped his fingers. Instantly, metal 10 rings rapidly detached from his 2 thick arms. Then, They formed a radiant purple energy halo above the power pack. I told you to read books occasionally. It's true that this is a forge world, but besides the Adeptus Mechanicus's protectors, what else is there more of? Countless civilian workers crammed into the hive cities. In the current situation, an Astartes, or rather, a Primarch who has revealed his identity, is akin to a life-saving straw falling from the sky for those with the most unwavering faith. Also, did you really think Cypher was only preparing to escape before? He has already secretly met with the Ecclesiarchy priests on Griffin IV. Although the Ecclesiarchy's power is greatly suppressed by the Adeptus Mechanicus's called Mechanicus faith in the Forge world, the inherent nature of religion also gives them considerable influence in countless hive cities. Once the command authority of a fully formed Astra Militarum regiment is in hand, the mortal soldiers will undoubtedly only recognize me. And as long as I, as a Primarch, unite the Ecclesiarchy and countless civilians, who do you think will ultimately be in charge after that? Us, or a bunch of emotionless oil brains? At that moment, Roach's deep words caused Wolf Roach to widen his eyes subconsciously. He gazed at Roach in front of him with a suspicious look. Then, he drove his masterwork power armor towards Cypher Roach's direction. Did you guys plan this out long ago? Please, did the Space Wolves enhancement surgery also remove your brain? Or did Korn's generous blessings eat up your wisdom? We are fundamentally the same person, different variations from different time periods, at most only differing in known information and combat experience. If both of us can consciously figure this out, how could you not think of it? Cypher Roach couldn't help but spread his hands towards the other, shaking his head and sighing as he spoke. All right, I concede. In the future, whoever you guys say to chop, I'll go chop. Wolf Roach, with twitching corners of his mouth, blinked his cyan wolf pupils a few times. He finally yielded to Roach and Cypher Roach, and after the small disagreement between the three was resolved, Roach and the others quickly took action. Cypher Roach needed to negotiate with the oil brains while mobilizing unlimited supplies and equipment. Moreover, he also shouldered a secret mission that Roach tacitly approved. If the oil brains of Griffin IV's command hierarchy were stubborn and unyielding, then it would be better to send them to see the Omnisea en masse. Although doing so before the arrival of the Tyrannid Swarm fleet was too risky. But compared to the life and death of billions of people in the entire Forge world, the oil brains became insignificant. Soon after, Roach led Wolf Roach to the Astra Militarum's garrison. And when he arrived in front of the first mortal soldier, the pair of black and red wings that slowly unfolded behind the power pack, coupled with the purple halo like a god descending. Almost instantly, countless Astra Militarum soldiers knelt on one knee and offered an insurmountable loyalty with extremely fervent expressions. Look, it's the Primarch. The Emperor be praised, an angel has descended. Instantly, countless chaotic words of praise or exclamation were constantly transmitted to Roach and the others' ears. And just as several tech priests who had come with Roach and them vaguely sensed something was wrong and wanted to turn around and leave, Wolf Roach, baring his fangs, blocked the oil brains with a phase sword enshrouded in green light. He said to the tech priests who didn't dare to act rashly with a smile. The Primarch has ordered you to temporarily stay at the Astra Militarum's garrison to assist us in maintaining heavy vehicles. And considering that some of you even gave me a set of masterwork power armor, I won't make things difficult for you. As long as you obediently listen, I personally guarantee your personal safety. As Wolf Roach's words fell, the tech priests, who subconsciously exchanged glances with each other, bowed helplessly towards the front. We obey the Primarch's orders. Next, Roach, who had successfully taken over the command authority of the Astra Militarum regiment, immediately summoned all the command hierarchy. A total of 10 regimental commanders came to meet the Primarch. According to the introductions of the crowd, this Astra Militarum regiment included 4 armored regiments, 3 mechanized infantry regiments, 2 heavy infantry regiments, and 1 artillery regiment. Among them, the artillery regiment, with only 3,000 people, had the smallest number of soldiers. The remaining 9 regiments basically had over 10,000 people. That is to say, in the blink of an eye, Roach had more than 93,000 troops under his command, and this did not even count the larger number of heavy armor units. Leman Russ Vanquishers, Leman Russ Exterminators, Leman Russ Conquerors, Griffin IV Pattern Chimera Troop Carriers, Griffin IV Pattern Medusa Siege Guns, and many other heavy armor units. Quantities were all informed to Roach himself by the regimental commanders. Thus, Roach, who had unfolded a detailed map of Griffin IV, issued orders without any hesitation. The armored regiments and mechanized infantry regiments must maintain mobility. They needed to inspect and maintain all the heavy armor, while carrying fully loaded ammunition and supplies, preparing to engage in a mobile war with the landing Tyranid swarm at any time. As for the heavy infantry regiments and the artillery regiment, their task was to, after inspecting and maintaining their equipment, with the assistance of the Intelligent Control Legion and a large number of engineering equipment, dig extremely complex underground passages and ground trenches around the most important industrial cities of the entire Griffin IV. If time allowed, the usage area of the underground passages could even include the entry of heavy vehicles into consideration. At this moment, even though the Astra Militarum Regiment already knew that Griffin IV was about to face the invasion of the main Tyranid fleet, under the leadership of this Primarch they met for the first time. Their morale did not decrease in the slightest. Instead, they were filled with the tenacious will to fight to the end that was inherent in the human race. And this may be the unintentional personal charisma exuded by the Primarch. Or rather, the Primarch's own importance to the Imperium of man. After all, even mortal soldiers need a fearless leader to bring them a glimmer of hope, even if it is destined to be fruitless. Time slipped away, moment by moment. The entire fighting force of Griffin IV had been fully mobilized. With the help of the ecclesiarchy priests, a large number of Hive City citizens were subjected to intense war mobilization, fueled by the Primarch's personal arrival and rousing speeches. Almost every mortal, regardless of age or gender, became a part of the all-out war effort. Even though the upper echelons of the Adeptus Mechanicus had realized what Rourke and the others were up to, they had no choice but to swallow this bitter pill in the face of the overwhelming threat of the Tyranid main fleet. And, contrary to Rourke and his companions' worst expectations, they did not try to regain command authority over the entire Forge world. Instead, the tech priests of Griffin IV took the initiative to contact the Griffin Titan Legion, as well as the Frostclad Night House, which was also subordinate to the Titan Legion, to meet with Rourke and the others. As for the other Night House, Cadmus, they were currently en route from their home world, Latia, to the Forge world. It was only at this point that Rourke and the others unexpectedly learned from the tech priests that the main reason they had chosen to cooperate so readily was that 2 of the 8 resource-rich star systems surrounding the Forge world of Griffin IV had completely disappeared from the map, having been in the path of the main Tyranid fleet. Every astropath who tried to contact them either descended into madness, or could only receive the desperate and terrifying death throes of countless mortals gradually being turned into biomass. At this moment, Wild Rourke couldn't help but bare his fangs. He stared intently with his blue-gray wolf eyes at the 4 most esteemed Mechanicus Magi or Grand Magi before him. So, now you're willing to believe us? Your arrogance and stubbornness easily destroyed all human settlements in an entire star system. Hundreds of billions of mortals paid the price. In my opinion, even tearing you few apart with my bare hands would be the lightest of punishments. Seeing Wild Rourke's anger rising, Rourke, who had maintained a detached expression, immediately raised his hand to stop him. He stared at the Mechanicus Magi, who represented the entire Adeptus Mechanicus, and the commanders from the Titan Legion and Night Houses, and said calmly, "The disaster that has already occurred was not your intention, so there is no need to assign blame. The only good news is that we have learned the direction of the Tyranid main fleet's arrival, which has allowed us to find the right position for our battle focus. From this moment on, you, the Adeptus Mechanicus, will pack up all the technological blueprints and precious STCs and take them away. At the same time, 1/3 of the Adeptus Mechanicus fleet still in orbit around the Forge world will head to the opposite side of the planet from the direction the Tyranid fleet is coming from. If the war situation turns unfavorable, the only mission of this fleet will be to escape the Storm Nebula with everything that can rebuild the Forge world. Moreover, because I have already completed the war mobilization of many Hive cities, it is impossible to evacuate the civilians, otherwise, it will inevitably cause large-scale riots due to the question of who will become the survivors, thereby disrupting our defense plans and tasks. I can only pray as a Primarch, may the Emperor protect countless people, because once the battle situation becomes irreversible, they, who are ignorant but infinitely loyal to the Emperor, must coexist and die with Griffin IV." However, at this moment, facing Rourke's cold-blooded and utilitarian series of orders, Wild Rourke, his eyes wide with shock, was about to explode when Cypher Rourke forcibly stopped him. He slowly gazed deeply at Rourke, then said to the others with varying expressions, "The Primarch's words sound a bit cold-blooded, but there are some things he hasn't finished saying that I will add. That is, we still have a chance to defend this Forge world. If we can completely suppress the efficiency ratio of the Tyranid swarm obtaining biomass, making the hive mind believe that attacking this planet is not worth the effort, and thus induce it to retreat, that is the battle goal we are striving for. If necessary, we can even use a large amount of promethium to ignite the entire atmosphere of the Forge world. Of course, I personally cannot estimate the specific operation method and the subsequent losses caused, but compared to becoming a lifeless, dead planet, I believe any price is acceptable. At this moment, Cypher Rourke's calm words seemed to make everyone present forget to breathe. Even the Mechanicus Magi, who showed no emotional fluctuations, couldn't help but emit subtle sounds of gears turning from their mechanical bodies. If these tech priests had been secretly resentful of Rourke and the others for usurping their command authority, then now, the tech priests had to admit that they did not have the Primarch's and his Astartes' cold and insane decision-making ability. Soon after, this brief meeting ended completely. Rourke had gained command authority over the Griffin IV Forge world without bloodshed. At the same time, he also received enthusiastic support from the commanders of the Griffin Titan Legion. 6 Tech Guard detachments equipped with a large number of armored vehicles, 40 Reaver-class medium Titans, 20 Warhound-class Titans, 10 Warlord-class Titans, and 2 Imperator-class Titans. A total of 72 Titans, large and small, became one of the important fighting forces to resist the invasion of the Tyranid swarm. And this was actually only about half of the Titan numbers of the Griffin Titan Legion. More Titans were distributed throughout the Storm Nebula, and there was not enough time to mobilize them. At the same time, the Cadmus Knight House, which had quickly arrived at the Forge world, also brought Rourke approximately 200 mixed knight formations of Armiger-class knights and Dominus-class knights. Together with the nearly 300 Cerastus-class knight armors of the Frostclad Knight House. More than 500 knight armors, coupled with the heavy firepower that the Forge world had never lacked, were enough to give the Tyranid bugs that launched the first wave of attacks a good beating. And the most surprising thing was that the current lord of the Cadmus Knight House, an ambitious middle-aged nobleman, Baron Roland, after learning that the command authority of Griffin IV belonged to a mysterious Primarch, unhesitatingly led all the knight pilots to meet Rourke himself, and in front of a Grand Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, he swore allegiance to the Primarch. Rourke, overjoyed, naturally had no intention of refusing, and when he secretly asked the other party why he did so, he learned that the Cadmus Knight House had only made a guardian oath with the Griffin IV Forge world in the first place, because they had no choice but to bow their heads in the face of the Adeptus Mechanicus's strength. Rourke didn't say much about this. Currently, the three of them no longer had to act according to the tech priest's wishes. Moreover, a Knight House alone could be completely supported by the production capacity of their home world. What's more, Cypher Rourke had quietly infiltrated the fleeing fleet that was moving a large number of technological blueprints and precious STCs to make some purchases. They didn't care about one more thing that would offend the tech priests. As time passed again, all the Mortals and Shola Progenium troops, as well as the Titan Legion and even the Knight Armors, on Griffin IV had completed their mobilization and combat preparations. Soon after, countless fully powered large augury scanners began to densely display clearly visible terrifying shadows. This was precisely the only reliance of the Tyranid race to traverse the cold void, the traces left by a large number of narvhals. The Tyranid swarm had arrived. The brutal war between eating and being eaten began silently. At this moment, the Mechanicus fleets and orbital defense platforms stationed in near-Earth orbit became the first line of defense for the Forge world. Countless laser arrays and terrifyingly powerful lances of light unleashed continuous bombardment on the enormous Tyranid hive fleet. Soon after, countless space torpedoes were rapidly launched towards their designated massive targets. Rorqual-class bio ships, relying on their chitinous bio armor hundreds of meters thick to withstand this terrifying firepower, spewed out countless void combat units from their massive bio ports. Escort drones and outrider drones, under the cover of the larger Kraken bio ships, launched suicidal assaults on the Mechanicus's massive fleet. Even with the Mechanicus fleet's numerous defensive turrets rotating into metallic whirlwinds, forming a crisscrossing barrage of firepower, they could hardly resist these Tyranids who had learned the ways of Astartes' boarding tactics. When dozens of outrider drones crashed and shattered the iridescent void shields of a large metal warship, their bio hulls embedding themselves into the thick armor, an average of 100 Ripper swarms carried by each Outrider drone would immediately invade the ship's corridors, hacking and tearing apart any living thing within sight. At this moment, within the heavily damaged warships, squads of Adeptus Custodes vanguard troops clad in heavy armor would launch counterattacks towards the direction of the enemy incursion. Being practically mobile sources of radiation, they were, for the flesh and blood Tyranids, combat units with the greatest killing power. However, even as numerous Mechanicus warships and near-Earth orbital defense platforms were constantly being assaulted, an even greater number of Rorqual-class bio ships successfully pierced the Forge world's first line of defense. Even though they would endure even more terrifying firepower and torpedo bombardments from the surrounding warships. After countless Rorqual-class bio ships dispersed, hundreds of millions of first-wave Spore units had already been successfully deployed. At this moment, even the combat troops hiding in ground trenches and even many manufacturing plants could clearly see those biospores struggling and wriggling in midair. All Hydra anti-aircraft platforms opened fire immediately. Sha Luo, who was rapidly observing the battlefield situation in front of rows of light green projections, unhesitatingly issued the order to attack. Instantly, the quad-linked anti-aircraft guns on numerous Hydra anti-aircraft platforms, along with an even greater number of whirlwind missiles, began to fiercely strafe and bomb the countless spores in the sky. Within a short time, the entire sky of the Forge world was almost completely obscured by the fire of explosions and the pervasive smoke. Even with such dense ground fire, many spores still successfully landed. Those spores that landed far from densely populated areas were not completely cleared by the rapidly responding ground forces, allowing many Tyranid combat units to gradually gather after hatching. Approximately several hours later, the first massive Tyranid swarm appeared on the light green projection in front of Sha Luo. Gazing at the fangs and claws of the Tyranids, Sha Luo, with no emotional fluctuations on his face, quickly said, "Ground forces begin firing Hellstrike missiles in conjunction with whirlwind missile fire to saturate the area. Let's wear down the bugs, numbers first. Also, have all Hive City logistics factories begin ammunition and vehicle production tasks now." As soon as he finished speaking, countless Hellstrike missiles and whirlwind missiles were launched from within the manufacturing plants towards the direction the Tyranid swarm was approaching, unleashing continuous bombardment. The terrifying flames and shockwaves that constantly rolled out instantly engulfed a large number of Tyranids, temporarily halting their advance. For the next period of time, the constantly rising missiles and the fire of explosions almost never stopped. The advantage of being in a Forge world was that as long as the industrial hive cities did not immediately fall, then, before the raw materials were exhausted, the defensive firepower basically did not change much. As time continued to pass, the Mechanicus fleet in the sky gradually fell into a disadvantage, and even countless near-Earth orbital defense platforms were basically destroyed by the Tyranids. Only now did the true test for Forge World Griffin IV barely arrive. Rumbling, accompanying the countless biospores constantly falling deep into the ground, many Tyranid units gradually emerged from inside their cysts. And perhaps this Tyranid main fleet had already learned the Forge world's intelligence information in advance. In just over 10 hours, more than 20 bio-titans, Tyranid hierophants whose size was comparable to Imperial titans and tens of meters tall, appeared on the battlefield in succession. And beneath the massive limbs of those Tyranid hierophants, Tyranids swarmed out like a purple tide. At this moment, Sha Luo slowly activated his power armor and stood up. He raised his head and stared at those massive creatures that could be vaguely seen with the naked eye. Sha Luo took a deep breath. He immediately ordered the Griffin Titan Legion to freely sortie according to the battlefield situation. Their only goal was to eliminate these enemy titans that were enough to breach the industrial cities. Rumbling. The next moment, the god machines from the Mechanicus Titan Legion slowly moved their extremely heavy, massive steps. Gradually dispersing, they unleashed even fiercer firepower coverage towards the Tyranid hierophants like moving metal hills. Boom boom boom, accompanying a series of terrifying sonic booms and scorching light that were enough to overturn countless buildings. The human empire's most powerful laser weapon, the Volcano Cannon, was quickly activated by a Nemesis-class Titan, directly traversing the entire battlefield, and with just one strike, it crippled a Tyranid hierophant that was rushing forward. At the same time, the Knight Armors from the House Krast and House Cadmus also carried out defensive missions around the God Titans like agile mobile vehicles. As Knight Armors, their only duty was to prevent the endless Tyranids from threatening the Titans' actions. Buzz buzz buzz, Almost at the same time, countless Hellstrike missiles, once again rising from the numerous manufacturing plants, also fell into the Tyranid positions, erupting into even more terrifying fire of explosions. At this moment, the Titan Legion, gradually moving on the battlefield, suppressed by powerful firepower. Using 10 Warhound-class Titans and 20 Reaver-class Titans as an assault formation, they constantly hunted down the Tyranid Titan-class units. The Warlord-class Titans and Nemesis-class Titans, responsible for holding the line in the rear, constantly used the terrifying firepower weapons installed on their massive limbs, repeatedly disrupting any Tyranid Hierophants that wanted to engage in close-quarters melee combat with the assaulting Titan formations. However, just when the situation on the entire battlefield seemed to be gradually tilting towards the human empire's side, in the sky, where the light was gradually dimming, an even greater number of Rorschach-class bio ships once again dropped batches of spore units like a torrential downpour. At this moment, a terrifying war of attrition, a competition of production and endurance, had just begun. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Boom boom boom. After the night completely fell upon the Griffin IV Forge world, the Titan clashes on the large-scale battlefield continued. Amidst countless thick lasers and booming explosions, a Reaver-class Titan, whose void shields were worn through by the Tyranid bio-acid projectiles and flying units, unfortunately followed in the footsteps of the Tyranid bio-titans. It completely became a pile of huge, burning wreckage on the dim battlefield. Even the greater number of Tyranid Titan wrecks showed the formidable strength of the Griffin Titan Legion. However, the deaths of those Titan princes were still an immense loss for the Imperium of Man. At this moment, accompanied by the tremendous roars of countless vehicle engines, more than 2,000 Lehman Russ exterminator tanks and Conqueror tanks, coordinated by remote command, had formed into neat and long armored formations. While unleashing continuous fire on the Tyranid basic units swarming in front of them, they fearlessly advanced towards the center of the battlefield. And behind the countless heavy armored units were not the Astra Militarum, but a large number of mobile rad cleaners, escorted by Medusa siege cannons, constantly moving forward, the Freighterus Militia Vanguard. Holding radium carbines and clad in heavy armor, they marched forward in unison. After advancing a certain distance, the Medusa siege cannons would stop their tracks, and then quickly unleash deafening large-scale bombardments towards the Tyranid rear. And the taciturn vanguard troops would also take advantage of the occasional brief gaps that appeared between the armored units in front to unleash incredibly fierce and continuous bombardments on the Tyranids trying to surge into the rear of the armored line. As for the very rear of the entire force, was a Skitarii cohort numbering around several thousand, the last resort of the grease monkeys on the Griffin IV Forge world. These Castellan robots, slowly advancing with the tech priests, temporarily replaced the Astartes in their ecological niche. They would learn on the battlefield how to constantly find the synapse creatures of the Tyranids to carry out necessary decapitation strikes. Even if this old method could not delay the main Tyranid tendrils for too long, it was very different for the Imperium of Man. At this moment, the one responsible for specifically leading the Skitarii cohort was a tall figure wielding a phase sword and wearing dark red power armor. It was none other than the Wolf Lord Lehman Rorschach, who had securely donned a metal helmet. He had even managed to find an iron halo for protection. Primarch Rorschach needed to be in the command center, coordinating the movements between the various units, monitoring the consumption of logistical ammunition, and also needing to know the development of the overall battle situation as soon as possible. Moreover, even to stabilize the battle morale on the battlefield, the Primarch could not be easily allowed to go down and risk fighting. And Severus Rorschach was currently in the Mechanicus escape fleet on the back of the Forge world. He was responsible for commanding the remaining fleet that had just retreated to reorganize its strength, and once again carry out harassment guerrilla tactics against the Hive fleet that had almost surrounded the entire Forge world, trying to reduce the offensive pressure on the ground. Therefore, the only one who could shoulder the battlefield decapitation mission was Lehman Rorschach. At this moment, seeing countless orderly formations of heavy armored vehicles advancing frantically had already clashed fiercely with the Tyranid Hormagaunts and Termagants. Lehman Rorschach immediately raised his hand and beckoned. Several tech priests holding cog-toothed power axes, without any hesitation, beckoned dozens of Castellan robots to quickly follow his pace. The group began to pass through the rear of the main force, and launched an inconspicuous stealth operation towards the flank of the entire battlefield. Soon after, Leman Rash's gaze swept past several Warhound Titans that were slowly advancing and constantly emitting terrifying cannon fire. He vaguely spotted a massive monster deep within a pile of Tyranids in the distance, the traces of a hive tyrant heavily protected by a large number of Tyranid warriors and Tyranid lictors. At this moment, Leman Rasha, wearing a metal helmet, took a deep breath. Then, he unhesitatingly activated his power armor, rushing out of the trench like a roaring iron train, and launched a charge towards the hive tyrant. Rumble. At the same time, one by one, the Castellan robots, who immediately raised their heavy bolters or assault cannons, also leapt out of the hidden trench cover under the command of the tech priests, and launched continuous fire suppression towards the Tyranids in front. Chi-chi-chi. Accompanied by the almost imperceptible sound of spatial friction, the phase sword, which was simply the nemesis of flesh and blood creatures, was quickly wielded by Leman Rasha, who was charging into a dazzling green windmill. Almost every Tyranid warrior or termagant that pounced at him was instantly chopped into pieces of flesh and blood scattered all over the ground by the incredibly sharp blade. The next moment, 3 Tyranid lictors, each 4 meters tall, also quickly reacted and launched a frantic impact towards Leman Rasha's position from different directions. Now, rather than saying it was an Astartes with outstanding combat power, it could be said that Leman Rasha, a humanoid bloodthirster, showed no fear at all. His combat thinking became more and more calm, and he suddenly let out an angry roar that resounded through the night sky from inside his metal helmet. After the entire tall body quickly rushed forward a few steps, he actually slammed a metal iron fist wrapped in an ear-piercing scream towards an oncoming Tyranid lictor. Boom! In an instant, the Tyranid lictor, who had originally come menacingly, was completely knocked down into the bloody mud by Leman Rasha's punch, and forcibly stopped the opponent's terrifying impact. Then, under the incomparably horrified gaze of several tech priests, Leman Rasha, whose entire arm was full of serious injuries but was rapidly recovering and healing, once again wielded the phase sword in his palm. He launched an incomparably fierce chopping attack against the other 2 Tyranid lictors who were about to pounce on him. About dozens of seconds later, the tech priests, who had just reacted, quickly controlled dozens of Castellan robots to clean up a large number of termagants, and also besieged the Tyranid lictors. And Leman Rasha, who had activated his beast instinct, immediately seized the brief opportunity. He immediately used the green glowing phase sword in his palm to continuously slash across the huge heads of the 2 Tyranid lictors. When the 2 heavy heads, with unclosed eyes, fell heavily to the ground, Leman Rasha, whose ceramite armor was splashed with purple blood, finally had time to take a deep breath and temporarily recover the strength he had just consumed. The next moment, Leman Rasha quickly raised his hand and wiped away the purple blood stained on his visor. He drew the Avenger's blade from behind his power pack, and held it tightly in his palm like the phase sword. Chi-chi-chi, accompanied by wisps of psychic flames gradually rising from the Avenger's blade. Leman Rasha, who reactivated his power armor, suddenly let out a deafening war cry towards the even larger hive tyrant. For Russ and the Allfather. Follow me to charge. Winter. Accompanied by a deafening crash, the massive hive tyrant was flipped onto its back by Leman Russ, the Wolf Lord, who used the shoulder of his armor to ram it with a furious roar. Before its incredibly sharp and thick limbs could chop down on the dark red power armor, Leman Russ, the Wolf Lord, repeatedly stomped his magnetic boots on the tyrant's hard carapace and leapt high into the air. The sword of vengeance and the phase sword, held tightly in his grasp, turned their tips downwards and stabbed heavily into the hive tyrant attempting to rise and retaliate. Roar. As the hive tyrant's terrifying roar mingled with the splash of purple blood, the phase sword, violently pulled out by Leman Russ, slashed across the hive tyrant's enormous head. Chi-chi-chi. With the demise of this hive tyrant, the Tyranid forces within a 20-kilometer radius rapidly descended into chaos. However, on the more distant battlefields, many Tyranids remained unchanged. Countless termagants continued to launch relentless assaults on the armored vehicle formations, which were gradually covered in horrific scars. At this moment, Leman Russ, the Wolf Lord, instinctively shook his metal helmet and instantly reacted. There was more than one hive tyrant on the entire battlefield. He took a deep breath, and his towering frame quickly turned towards the Castellan robots, who were entangled in battle with Tyrant Guard, and charged towards them. After wielding his 2 melee weapons in turn, all the Tyrant Guard present were basically reduced to scattered pieces of flesh and blood. Taking advantage of the surrounding Tyranids' chaotic state, Leman Russ immediately led several tech priests and the Castellan robots they controlled. They launched continuous assaults deep into other areas. As time slowly passed, by the time the black night of the Forge world quietly receded, and dawn was about to arrive, the number of Hive Tyrants successfully slain by Leman Russ reached 3, not including the 2 Hive Tyrants that escaped after failed decapitation attempts. According to Russ's judgment from the command center, the decapitation operation bought the Imperial forces about 3 hours of respite. But it also indicated that shortly after each Hive Tyrant was beheaded by Leman Russ, the Hive Mind would revive them, or create new Hive Tyrants and throw them into the battlefield. Z's. At this moment, the Ripper swarms, whose numbers almost covered the entire battlefield, began to collect the remains of countless fallen Tyranids and even the human side. The relentless and fierce attacks launched by many Tyranids forced Primarch Russ to issue an order to temporarily contract the defensive line. With the exception of the Titan Legion, all Imperial forces retreated, returning to the trench passages dug out before the battle. Immediately afterward, Primarch Russ ordered a large number of Hellstrike missiles and Whirlwind missiles, which had been prepared for a long time inside the Forge factories, to be launched continuously in order to slow down the Tyranids' absorption of biomass. In the next moment, endless explosions and fire enveloped most of the Forge world's battlefield, almost without pause. However, several hours later, accompanied by extremely noisy and ear-splitting sounds, countless Tyranid flying units, gargoyles, flapped their large wings into the sky, and due to their sheer number, they completely obscured the bright afternoon light, plunging the entire battlefield into dimness. At the same time, slow-moving biovores and even larger exocrines gradually appeared on the edge of the battlefield. They formed neat offensive formations and launched continuous and fierce bombardments towards the huge industrial cities ahead. The Tyranids now seemed to have adapted to the Forge world's offensive methods and tactics, and even learned to use artillery units to retaliate. Faced with the Tyranids' gradually changing offensive methods, Primarch Russ ordered the Hydra flak platforms to be restarted, while ordering countless lightning fighters, barely cobbled together from inside the Forge factories, numbering only 500, to quickly take off and try to block the gargoyles' aerial invasion. Moreover, the Astra Militarum regiments were also constantly adjusting the firing angles of the Medusa siege guns to deal with the Tyranid artillery units that had emerged. But before long, everyone discovered that the Tyranids' attack on the city area was just a smokescreen. Their real target was the Titan Legion still roaming the battlefield. At this moment, many Reaver-class medium Titans became important offensive targets for a large number of gargoyles. Even if hundreds or thousands of gargoyles could hardly damage the Reaver-class Titans' void shields and heavy armor with their claws and limbs. But with the careful cooperation of more biovores and exocrines, they first used a large number of acidic spores and explosive liquids to repeatedly bombard the 4 void shields of the Reaver-class Titans, causing them to enter a state of malfunction. Then, gargoyles who were not afraid of sacrifice would swarm to attack the relatively weak back armor of the Reaver-class Titans, thereby completely destroying these already scarce Titan units. Boom boom boom. By the time a considerable number of Medusa siege guns, in conjunction with Hellstrike missiles, annihilated most of the Tyranid artillery positions, only less than 10 Reaver-class Titans remained on the entire battlefield. And if it weren't for the Warlord Titans and Warhound Titans located in front of the industrial city's front lines taking great risks to carry out rescue missions. At the same time, the scarce Lightning Fighter squadrons also performed exceptionally well in their role as flying units, forcibly blocking the fierce attacks of more gargoyles. Then the Griffin Titan Legion's Reaver-class Titans would probably be completely annihilated. Even so, the entire Titan Legion currently only has 9 Reaver-class Titans left, 15 Warhound Titans and 8 Warlord Titans. The 2 Imperator-class Titans, due to undertaking the long-range offensive mission of Titan Killers, basically did not suffer any major damage. And at this moment, the time since the Tyranids launched their first large-scale attack has only passed about 48 hours. Rumble rumble. Soon after, accompanied by gargoyle units flying all over the sky, huge Bio-Titans once again revealed their massive and terrifying figures. And the Tyranid swarm, which was far larger than the previous one, once again appeared on the edge of the huge battlefield. For the hive mind of the Tyranids, one or several failed attacks only resulted in the loss of some biomass. But for the Imperial forces on the Forge world, they may be able to win countless times with their powerful war and production capabilities. But as long as they lose once, everything will fall into eternal doom. Approximately 96 hours later. Winter. A metallic hand, stained with tyrannid blood, slammed heavily onto a metal desk. Instantly, a clear, visible purple handprint was imprinted upon it. At this moment, Rorschach, the Wolf of Winter, his disheveled gray-white hair soaked with sweat, bared his teeth and roared at the Primarch Rorschach before him. The Griffin Titan Legion has suffered grievous losses. Of 72 Titans of all sizes, only 22 remain. The knight suits of the Hivernian Knights family number less than 50. The Cadmus family, however, still has over 100 knight suits barely capable of redeployment. Furthermore, the vanguard of the million-strong Adeptus Ministorum has been almost completely annihilated. Once the remaining few 100,000 Ministorum skirmishers are wiped out, the less than 100,000 Astra Militarum soldiers and the few thousand Castellan robots of the Adeptus Mechanicus will be all that's left to hold the line. My esteemed Primarch, if you have any solutions left, you'd better unleash them all at once. Rorschach's words were cut short. Slowly raising a hand of Oromite, the Primarch Rorschach wiped away a few drops of purple blood that had splattered onto his face. His expression growing ever more indifferent, Primarch Rorschach took a deep breath and said calmly to the Wolf of Winter before him, "You need not worry about the combat personnel holding the line. A dozen hours ago, I ordered the Ecclesiarchy to recruit ordinary citizens from the Hive cities, encouraging them to bravely join the front lines. Millions will be given lasguns and, under the zealous guidance of the Ecclesiarchy priests, will quickly proceed to the battlefield." However, Primarch Rorschach's words were cut short. The Wolf of Winter, baring his white fangs, abruptly overturned the metal table in front of him. His eyes wide with effort, he roared furiously at Primarch Rorschach. "Are you out of your mind? Sending untrained civilians to the battlefield will accomplish nothing but providing biomass for the bugs. Furthermore, our duty is to protect mortals, not to send them to their deaths." "Oh, really? Then tell me, what should we do?" At that moment, Primarch Rorschach, his bronze face twitching slightly, abruptly stood up, his Oromite power armor whirring. He stared intensely into the blue wolf eyes of the Wolf of Winter, and growled out almost one word at a time. "The large number of armored vehicles that are still operational need Astra Militarum soldiers familiar with their operation to control them. Are we supposed to let clueless civilians take the reins? Once these vehicles or missile launchers cease functioning, the bugs, no longer suppressed by large-scale firepower, will immediately surge into the positions and industrial cities we've struggled to maintain, tearing our comrades apart. They will devour the very mortals you care about most. What are we facing now? The Tyrannids, devoid of fear and dread, with only one goal, to consume everything. Even if we were facing a chaos army, I could devise other ways to achieve victory. But the bugs will not reason with you, nor will they negotiate. Wolf Cub, wake up. Do you think we are holding out until the moment of victory? Wrong. We are merely delaying the arrival of defeat." Primarch Rorschach's fierce words gradually quelled the Wolf of Winter's savage aura. Sacrifice is the only foundation upon which the Imperium endures. It was a profound truth he had long understood. At this moment, throughout the command center, nearly all of the tech priests and magi biologists turned their heads to look at the Astartes and Primarch, who looked almost identical. "I know you're right, and I understand that you've already done everything possible, but I am not resigned." The Wolf of Winter took a deep breath. He stared intently at Primarch Rorschach before continuing. "I refuse to concede defeat so easily. I would rather make the bugs pay a more terrible price before I die in battle. Truth be told, in the current situation, even if the Emperor himself manifested and summoned the bound warriors, or even if you immediately turned to Khorne and became a chosen of chaos, it wouldn't save us, because the warped shadow of the hive mind is blocking most of the psychic power." Primarch Rorschach also took a deep breath and glanced around at the tech priests or magi biologists. Once they quickly turned their heads and continued to busy themselves with other matters. He refocused his gaze on the face of the Wolf of Winter. "However, even if the battlefield situation has reached a point where we truly cannot salvage it, there is still one last resort. Although limited by the overall structure of the Griffin IV Forge world and the insufficient amount of promethium stored, we cannot completely replicate the fanciful idea proposed by Cypher of burning the entire planet. However, according to the ancient information I obtained from the Adeptus Mechanicus, in the past, they concealed many Deathstrike missiles in some of the armories deep within the Forge world. Yes, the ultimate weapon still carries nuclear warheads. In other words, even if Griffin IV loses, a massive nuclear explosion will take these bugs down a path of mutual destruction." At this moment, Primarch Rorschach's undisguised and somber words caused countless Adeptus Mechanicus personnel to stop their actions once again. After a slight hesitation, they all knelt on one knee towards the Primarch and slowly lowered their heads. Primarch, rather than struggling and becoming food for the Tyranids, we are willing to personally destroy this forge world. As long as you give us more time, we can rebuild the prosperity of Griffin IV on other planets. Primarch, please give us the order. Countless voices, some impassioned, some indifferent, echoed one after another. But every oily, aged word agreed with the idea that Primarch Rorschach had just spoken. At this moment, Primarch Rorschach and the Wolf of Winter, whose expression had become serious, exchanged a glance. He closed his eyes slightly and remained silent for a moment. Then, without hesitation, he opened his eyes wide and issued the order. Notify all units, prepare to launch all Deathstrike missiles. Let us, the Imperium of Man, give the hive mind of the bugs an unforgettable lesson. Dash 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 dash. Rumble, accompanied by the violent roaring of countless engines. Thousands of heavy vehicles were thrown back into the meat grinder that was the brutal battlefield. The entire Astra Militarum regiment, along with millions of mortals armed only with lasguns, stepped over the broken corpses of Tyranids and Adeptus Ministorum, launching a continuous offensive charge towards the tidal wave of Tyranids. At the same time, the surviving Warhound Titans and Warbringer Nemesis Titans of the Griffin Titan Legion unleashed incredibly fierce ranged bombardments on the enemy's Titan units, while silently initiating a withdrawal plan towards the rear of the battlefield. The remaining 9 Reaver-class medium Titans followed the advancing main force without any path of retreat, launching a terrifying assault. In order not to alert the Tyranid hive mind to any abnormalities, the command echelon led by Primarch Rorschach did not inform any units on the front lines about the imminent launch of the Deathstrike missiles. Instead, they gradually redeployed the combat forces that could be temporarily withdrawn through orders, and notified the entire Astra Militarum regiment to lead countless mortals to take on the death mission of holding the rear. Soon after, the Hivernian Knights family and the Cadmus Knights family, with a total of only about 100 knight suits remaining, unexpectedly received orders for temporary repairs and gradually withdrew from the chaotic battlefield. In the next moment, one Deathstrike missile after another, rising from within numerous forge factories, gradually streaked across the sky, forming a terrifying scene that blotted out the sun. The hive mind, vaguely aware that the battlefield situation was not quite right, seemed to want to quickly command a large number of Tyranid units to disengage from the battlefield. But they were stubbornly held back by countless loyal mortals who disregarded their lives, and the Astra Militarum armored formations that had reluctantly become pawns and were willing to make sacrifices. And as countless extremely brief and brilliant flashes of light bloomed one by one in midair, every inch of land on the Forge World Griffin IV was completely enveloped by continuous shockwaves and terrifying flames. Even though the nuclear explosion had ended long ago, the Earth was still emitting violent tremors in pain. Even the sky was gradually obscured by the rolling, rising sea of fire and dark smoke. Looking around, countless buildings exposed above the ground were constantly collapsing due to the endless shockwaves. As for those industrial hive cities located beneath the ground, apart from the vast majority of the Adeptus Mechanicus logistics personnel in the upper hive who could escape by chance, the remaining mortals were basically buried under the abyss of 10,000 jong. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by buzzing sounds that cut through the air and a large amount of smoke. Metal rings, each filled with purple energy, constantly destroyed the wreckage of metal buildings falling from above. At this moment, Luo Sha, covered in dust, did not care about the light golden bloodstains slowly flowing down from the corner of his forehead. He spat out the dust and debris in his mouth and issued a series of commands like a magic needle fixing the sea to the surrounding noisy crowd that was obviously panicking. All tech priests who can still breathe and move, check the injuries of the surrounding comrades. Immediately send a group of people to the hangar to check the damage to the Devourer-class transport ships and Titan transport ships. That is our best option for evacuating the Forge world. Also, have those Starseers who have not gone mad contact the fleeing fleet still in near-Earth orbit and have them send more Whale-class transport ships and fighter squadrons to meet us as soon as possible. Wolf Cub, lead the remaining Adeptus Custodes outside to check on the situation in the Hive City. Remember, save as many as you can, but as soon as I give the order to retreat, you must turn around and leave. Understand? Do I even need you to tell me that? The entire person, also covered in dust, Wild Wolf Luo Sha shook his head violently. He immediately activated his power armor and stepped forward, using the transphasic sword in his palm to forcibly split open a large piece of shattered metal blocking the entrance to the command center, then ran towards the more complicated outside world without looking back. Soon after, the machine oil elders, who had experienced a large-scale nuclear explosion for the first time, gradually regained their composure. Under Luo Sha's leadership, they quickly contacted the logistics personnel outside to tally the current losses. Although the most important blueprints and STC had already been transferred in advance. Moreover, almost every machine oil elder had voted in favor of this plan to destroy the Forge world. However, seeing with their own eyes the complete scrapping of a large number of heavy vehicle production lines and the destruction of countless mortal workers also made these Mechanicus Magi feel incomparable heartache. However, Luo Sha, whose expression remained indifferent from beginning to end, only glanced at the roughly tallied casualty figures. He didn't give it any more thought. Instead, after a period of time, he unhesitatingly issued the final order to retreat completely. Now, the Griffin IV Forge world has been destroyed by their own hands. There are not many high-value strategic targets in the city worth the remaining combat personnel sacrificing their lives for. Even the Tyrannid swarm on the surface has temporarily disappeared. However, outside the dark smoke covering the earth, the Tyrannid fleet wandering in the cold void must still be there. And Luo Sha did not dare to bet whether the hive mind would choose to give up and retreat due to the imbalance of biomass income and expenditure. Rumble rumble, right in the ground hangar full of rubble and cracks. Deafening heavy footsteps sounded one after another. The god machines of the Griffin Titan Legion were slowly entering the interior of the even larger Titan transport ship. Not far away, knight armors with scarred armor shells were also being rapidly directed by more servitors and even tech priests. They were constantly being placed inside hundreds of Devourer-class transport ships. And just as more Adeptus Mechanicus logistics personnel were repeatedly transporting many supplies that could be taken away. Ka. The industrial city's almost devastated outer perimeter. Countless Tyrannid Ravener suddenly broke through the surface, and the fangs and claws of the Tyrannids quickly unfolded towards the survivors. At this moment, the hive mind did not choose to give up, but continued to launch a new round of attack. It seems that destroying the Forge world, in addition to the necessary feeding, may also have other strategic purposes. Dong dong dong. In an instant, thousands of Castellan robots on standby, preparing to retreat, under the command of a group of tech priests, immediately took on the task of guarding. They fired at the approaching Tyrannid swarm while launching a more intense close-quarters fight. At the same time, accompanied by the terrifying roar of metal rings, Luo Sha, holding the scythe of blood, also revealed his tall figure like a crazily speeding steel train, and then launched an incomparably terrifying charge towards the direction of the Tyrannid swarm. At this moment, he seemed to completely vent the pent-up anger he had been accumulating during this period on the Tyrannids. The metal rings flying back and forth in midair and the scythe of blood dancing in his palm into rounds of green halos constantly chopped the countless Ravener in front of him into scattered pieces of flesh and blood. Don't worry about me, everyone continued to retreat. Seeing teams of Castellan robots approaching him, Luo Sha, whose bronze face was covered with purple blood, roared without looking back. He desperately drove the vibranium power armor forward, letting countless sharp limbs chop on the indestructible armor shell. And even if the number of Tyrannids in front of him seemed endless at a glance, Luo Sha, who kept launching charges, did not show the slightest fear. He just completely transformed into an emotionless killing machine, forcibly dividing the entire Tyrannid attack team into two halves. Boom boom boom. At this moment, whirlwind missiles suddenly cut through the dim midair. They quickly crashed towards the Ravener who were trying to surround Luo Sha. The next moment, a dark red tall figure also waved two melee weapons like an unstoppable monster and rushed into the interior of the Tyrannid swarm. Primarch, what the hell are you doing again? You are now a commander. You are the backbone of everyone. If you are accidentally eaten by the Tyrannids, then the human empire will really become a big joke. Wild Wolf Luo Sha, who suddenly danced a large circle of transphasic swords in his palm, quickly cleared a large gap in countless Tyrannids. He took the opportunity to drive the power armor through the gap, rushed to Luo Sha's side, widened his eyes and roared at the other party. It's just a bunch of Tyrannids, what's there to be afraid of? Weren't you going to save people? What are you doing here? Where are the people you saved? Luo Sha, with a stern expression, did not look back. He just waved his hand casually, and the metal rings spinning rapidly in an instant formed an incomparably terrifying metal storm, completely tearing the surrounding Tyranids that were surging up into flying pieces of flesh and blood. The living people who could be found or easily dug out have been sent to the transport fleet. We don't have any extra time or equipment to rescue those mortals who can't be found or are buried deeper in the Hive City. The fleeing fleet has already launched a confrontation with the Tyranid fleet above our heads, and a large number of whale-class transport aircraft are waiting for our arrival. Wild Wolf Luo Sha, grinning, quickly glanced at the surrounding battlefield situation. He unhesitatingly raised his hand and sent a signal for help to the Castellan robot formation in the distance, then turned his head and shouted at Luo Sha, who was still killing. Retreat. This time we admit defeat. But there will be opportunities in the future to send a big gift to the Hive Mind. In the future. No need for the future, I will give the Hive Mind a greeting gift now. At this moment, Luo Sha, who had vented a lot of depression by killing, suddenly raised his head to look at the sky. He first sneered, then took a deep breath. Immediately afterwards, a huge palm wrapped in vibranium was quickly raised above his head. Chi chi chi. The next second, 4 pillars of heavenly scales divine power, as dazzling as pillars of light, suddenly burst out from the protective rings towards the depths of the cold void beyond the dark clouds. And inside a large number of hive fleets that were launching fierce confrontations with the fleeing fleet. A phantom energy dragon head, the size of a planetary satellite, was slowly summoned by the constantly intertwined and fused heavenly scales divine power. And accompanied by the silent opening and closing of that huge dragon mouth. Streams of scorching energy, carrying the anger and resentment of billions of sacrificed humans, immediately launched an uncontrollable and crazy spray towards the nearby Cargoyle ships. Soon after, one after another Devourer-class transport ships and Titan transport ships continuously pierced through the dark clouds shrouding the entire Forge world. And under the siege of a large number of Tyranid void units, successfully entered the sailing formation of the escape fleet. And when everything was ready, Severo Shah, as the fleet commander, unhesitatingly issued the order to accelerate the withdrawal. In an instant, the remaining 30 or so massive Adeptus Mechanicus ships, with the constant sacrifice of countless fighter squadrons and frigates, forcibly broke through the encirclement of the Tyranid main force's tentacle fleet, and after moving away from the Forge world for a certain distance, a large number of ships quickly activated the Geller field, and then plunged into the warp. Dong dong dong, along with the heavy sound of magnetic boots stepping on the metal floor. Severo Shah, driving his power armor, passed through the dimly lit passageway, arriving at an observation room shielded by countless heavy armor plates. Within his field of vision, Wild Wolf Roche, who was wiping his melee weapon alone, and Primarch Roche, who had his arms crossed, were both silently lost in thought, not even looking up when someone entered. Our destination is the more remote Lyrae, the homeworld of the Night House Cadmus, and the surviving astropaths have already notified the entire sector and even Terra of the destruction of Forge World Griffin IV. The subsequent reaction forces will be enough to intercept or repel this main Tyranid tendril fleet. Severo Shah glanced around at everyone, then said to them indifferently, "Brothers, this battle has taught me a lesson, that is, a person may win a battle, but may lose the entire war. Although I enjoyed the rare freedom, I am still just one person after all." At this moment, Wild Wolf Roche, who was wiping his melee weapon, slowly raised his head. He turned his head towards Severo Shah and said in a deep voice, "I might need some help, do you have any suggestions for this?" "Hee," I said, "your battle is not here, and someone is waiting for you. Perhaps after meeting the other party, your wish can be realized immediately, but you must also be prepared to die in battle at any time, because once you make a choice, you can never turn back." Severo Shah shook his head slightly. He mysteriously and vaguely said to Wild Wolf Roche, "Riddle man, get out. I'm too lazy to deal with you. If you ever act like an Eldar Farseer in front of me again, I will chop you to pieces with a sword." Wild Wolf Roche bared his teeth and threw down the melee weapon in his palm. He turned his head and shouted at Roche, who had his arms crossed. "Hey, Primarch, are you stupid? What are you thinking about again? It's comfortable to live without using your brain. I'm considering the gains and losses of this battle. Griffin IV is destroyed, but the most important data blueprints in STC have been preserved, and since there are basically no casualties among the tech priests, it also means that more unshareable technological knowledge has been saved. As long as they are given a planet with a suitable geographical location, a brand new forge world will rise from the ground. But this is from the perspective of the Imperium of Man. What can we get? At this moment, Rorschach, who was driving his vibranium power armor, slowly turned around and focused his gaze on Rorschach. He took a deep breath and continued to ask, "How much did you get?" Leman Russ Vanquisher, Leman Russ Exterminator, Medusa Siege Gun, and Chimera Armored Personnel Carrier. Even the blueprints for the volcano cannon have been copied by me. If the STCs weren't really too big, and the tech priests weren't guarding them like treasures every day, I could even get you a few STCs to play with. Hearing Rock's question, Rorschach immediately took out a metal module the size of a human head from the temporal crystal in front of his breastplate. He raised his hand and threw it towards the other party, then said indifferently, "Pung," and Rorschach, who quickly caught it, solemnly put this metal module carrying a large amount of blueprints and data into the simulator's resource page, so as not to encounter any unexpected situations. Now that we have basically obtained what we need, what do we do next? At this moment, Rorschach asked, staring at Rorschach, who was obviously relieved. "Don't even think about taking away the Griffin Titan Legion. The Oilers won't let go easily even if they clash with us, and the return portal may not be able to bring back such a big thing as a Titan. But the Night Houses, especially the Night House Cadmus, have already fallen out with the Adeptus Mechanicus. If we don't take over, they may suffer the squeeze and oppression of the Adeptus Mechanicus in the future. Even for the sake of the Primarch's reputation and face, they have to come with us." Rorschach squinted his eyes and thought for a while. He suddenly shook his head at Wild Wolf Rorschach and said, "Wolf Cub, you go and find the people from House Cadmus. I want to talk to them in detail." "Why should I go?" Wild Wolf Rorschach complained without turning his head. "Because since you chose not to use your brain, then don't waste your physical strength." At this moment, Rorschach unhesitatingly continued the words that Rorschach wanted to say. He nodded at the other party with a smile on his face. Dash 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 dash. Before the Adeptus Mechanicus's escape fleet arrived at Lyrae, the Primarch, who once again held secret talks with Night House Cadmus, successfully gained the other party's true trust and recognition. The new generation of knights, led by Orlando, the heir in line of succession of one of the 12 barons, chose to continue fighting alongside the Primarch. While the old people, represented by Sir William and Baron Roland, need to shoulder the ancient responsibility of guarding their homeworld of Lyrae. In addition, they need to re-establish a good relationship with the Oilers from Griffin IV in the name of the Primarch, and gradually transform the geographically very remote Lyrae into a safe house suitable for everyone to take temporary refuge. Of course, this was not Rock's own suggestion, but an idea occasionally put forward by Rorschach. However, based on the fact that the other party had said it, and the conditions in all aspects were suitable. After thinking for a while, Rorschach agreed to this request. Before long, when a group of Oilers came to seek the advice of the Primarch, wanting to ask them how they should rebuild the Forge world, Rorschach, with a flash of inspiration, also pointed out a clear path for the Oilers. From the distribution of each star region, every Forge world occupies the most important and prosperous geographical location in the current star region. Even if they can use various relationships to enter a new star region, then simply sharing the mineral transportation routes will become a huge problem. But now, the more remote Ghoul stars, no one will rob the territory there. And countless unexploited mineral planets are enough to support a new Forge world from scratch. Of course, this time Rorschach only gave a suggestion that was beneficial to him, instead of issuing orders in the name of the Primarch and forcibly executing them. After all, even he himself knew that the Ghoul stars was never a secluded paradise, but a wild and desolate outer region where all kinds of demons and monsters run around. There are not only Tyranids there, and according to the records and legends passed down by the Carcharodons, sometimes, even the Tyranids will accidentally become the delicacies of some things, accompanied by the faint sound of a spatial rift slowly tearing open. Inside the ancient ritual hall on the top level of the battle barge, water monster, 3 tall, robust figures gradually emerged from the chaotic nothingness. However, as a faint light, almost piercing through the adamantium armor, emanated from the back of one of Rogheil's hands. The warp gate behind the 3 not only didn't disappear but expanded even further. Thump, thump, thump. The next second, heavy footsteps echoed around. One after another, ancient knight armors with scarred external plating walked out of the warp gate. After the 21st knight armor finally stepped onto the metal floor of the ancient ritual hall, Rogheil, with a few beads of sweat faintly appearing on his forehead, quickly closed the warp gate and exhaled forcefully. As expected, it's not as easy as I thought. If I were to transfer a larger number of combat units, the physical and mental stress I would have to endure would be far greater than fighting and slaughtering. Catching a thrown gelt that was tossed to him, Rogheil said to Wolf Rogheil and Cypher Rogheil beside him without turning his head. Cypher Rogheil nodded slightly, considering it a response to Rogheil's words. Only Wolf Rogheil grinned nonchalantly. He turned and walked towards the knight armors that were gradually opening their hatches. Not long after, Tyberos the Red Wake, chapter master of the Carcharodons, arrived at the scene. At this moment, the other party, bowing slightly, was already accustomed to the existence of the Primarch and the Primarch's clones. However, when Tyberos occasionally learned that these knight armors and knight pilots were all ancient relics from hundreds of years ago, he still gasped at the power of the Primarch, or rather, the Emperor. Subsequently, Chapter Master Tyberos would treat these 21 knight pilots with the highest standards of hospitality, as Rogheil requested. Anyway, according to Rogheil's words, these people wouldn't be staying for long, they still had to go to another place. The Carcharodons chapter was just a temporary transit station. In response, Tyberos, repeatedly raising his head to gaze at the knight armors, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, these knight armors didn't need the Carcharodons chapter to supply them, otherwise, it would have been another difficult matter. After rearranging the knight pilots, Rogheil, suddenly remembering something, once again inquired of Tyberos. Tyberos, has a new forge world appeared in the Ghoul Stars? Primarch, according to my memory, there shouldn't be one, otherwise, we would have definitely clashed, had dealings with it. Currently, the forge world closest to the Ghoul Stars is only the triple forges of Phaeton, located at the border between Ultima Segmentum and the Eastern Fringe. They occasionally become one of our Carcharodons' tithe trading partners. The massive Tyberos pondered for a moment. He said to Rogheil in a low voice without hesitation. Rogheil, whose expression didn't change much, nodded slightly. He waved his hand to let Tyberos leave temporarily, then quickly opened the simulator's diplomacy page. Rogheil only glanced at it and saw that the Griffin chapter and House Cadmus, two new diplomatic entities, were prominently listed. Furthermore, their reputation was basically maintained between respected and revered. However, only the Forge World Griffin IV had only a name and the words, under reconstruction, marked, while the rest of the information was a large question mark. Tisk, is spacetime ultimately linear, or are there some special structures I don't understand? Shouldn't the new Forge World be a foregone conclusion? Or is it because of my words that this unexpected situation occurred? Schrodinger's Forge World, existing and not existing, or is it a problem with the simulator? Rogheil, who always mocked Wolf Rogheil for not using his brain, also had no solution this time. After all, this level of profound knowledge was probably only known by one being. And Rogheil happened to not be on good terms with that being. Furthermore, he himself didn't have that much curiosity or thirst for knowledge. Forget it, it was just an idle move anyway. It doesn't matter if it's in the Ghoul Stars or not. At worst, I'll find a way to seize another Forge World. Pooey, it's to return to the Primarch's command. Slightly shaking his head, Rogheil directly closed the simulator's page. He quickly activated his adamantium power armor and turned to walk towards the others. Dash 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 dash. In the following period, Wolf Rogheil and Cypher Rogheil, along with the Terminator squad, became Rogheil's laborers for obtaining throne gelts. However, when Rogheil's throne gelts had just broken through double digits, that is, after having a total of 13 throne gelts, Wolf Rogheil, who had suffered serious injuries several times in the prayer support, no longer intended to go. According to the other party's words, even if he traveled in the warp every day, he might not encounter so many intense battles and terrifying battlefields. This kind of blessing could only be endured by Rogheil, the Primarch. He couldn't enjoy it at the moment. Cypher Rogheil also hinted to Rogheil between the lines that they actually had other things to deal with. They only continued to help for so long for the sake of the Primarch, or rather, the main body. In response, Rogheil didn't have much unwilling negative thoughts, because the responsibilities borne by the other clones might not be much easier than his own. In the end, Wolf Rogheil and Cypher Rogheil decided to temporarily bid farewell to the Primarch and leave the Carcharodon's Void Fleet to enter the warp. During their farewell, Cypher Rogheil specially reminded Rogheil again that the black bracelet he had given him before needed warp power, that is, psychic power, to activate. Furthermore, according to some distinguishing methods set by Cypher Rogheil himself, the red signal represented the wolf cub, the blue signal represented him, and the green signal represented the Primarch. Once the signal flashed briefly and rapidly, it meant that any party needed strong support. Prolonged, continuous flashing indicated that it might involve a major event related to the rise and fall of the Imperium of Man, requiring everyone to be more cautious. Buzz, 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 accompanied by the rising and scattering of Eldar runes on the webway beacon. A webway portal with a surface as smooth as a mirror slowly appeared in front of the three. At this moment, Rogheil, taking a deep breath, first gazed at Wolf Rogheil, then turned his gaze to Cypher Rogheil. I hope that the next time we meet, everyone will be able to live well, just like we once said, you are me, but you are not me, and everyone's responsibilities and paths of battle are completely different. May the Emperor protect you all. See you later, brothers. As soon as Rogheil's voice fell, Wolf Rogheil, baring his teeth and showing a bright smile, raised his hand and patted Rogheil's heavy shoulder armor. He turned his head directly and walked into the depths of the webway portal. Cypher Rogheil also showed a faint smile. He nodded slightly in the direction of Rogheil. Then, without any hesitation, he turned and stepped into the webway portal. Kai. The next moment, the webway portal, constantly emitting a low hum, completely disappeared in front of Rogheil. On the empty metal floor, it was as if nothing had ever existed. Am I going to fight alone again? Calculating the time, it's time to go back to the homeworld to take a look, and by the way, bring the night pilots back too. Rogheil, faintly sighing, reactivated his adamantium power armor. He walked towards the ship's passage without turning his head. Changzi Island Base, deep underground. Above the brightly lit circular plaza, a gradually tearing large spatial rift slowly emerged in front of the Emperor's statue. The Carcharodon librarian, Yukari, kneeling on one knee, was desperately using his psychic powers to maintain the stability of the spatial rift. Boom, boom, boom. In the next second, one after another, massive, broken knight armors stepped out of the spatial rift, their incredibly heavy, giant feet repeatedly stomping on the spotless metal floor. After all 21 knight armors had entered the circular plaza, Rokas, clad in vibranium power armor, with a circle of purple light floating above his power pack, slowly revealed his figure. Why does it feel like the space here has gotten a lot bigger? It seems David hasn't been idle either. Librarian Yukari, you don't need to maintain it anymore. Rokas raised his head, looked around, and subconsciously let out a sigh. He then turned his head and nodded to Librarian Yukari to the side. After the large spatial rift behind him suddenly disappeared, and Librarian Yukari was quickly carried away by the waiting automatic servitors due to temporary exhaustion and unconsciousness. Rokas slightly raised his head and took several deep breaths. The familiar smell of the air between his mouth and nose also made his entire restless mood obviously quiet and steady down. Buzzing. At this moment, accompanied by the subtle sounds emitted by many floating engines, a metal floating chair, about 3 meters high and very bulky, quickly appeared inside the passage connecting the circular plaza. In the next second, the mechanical voice belonging to Iron Man David was transmitted from far to near to Rokas' ears. Welcome back, my lord. Hearing the familiar voice, Rokas couldn't help but reveal a hint of irrepressible smile. He immediately drove the vibranium power armor to turn around and look. Then, the whole person asked with a slightly surprised opening, David, what is this? At this moment, Iron Man David, completely sitting upright inside the metal floating chair, even his aura was completely different from before. At a glance, the other party looked more like the final boss of a mysterious organization, or a supervillain who had changed his name and lived in seclusion. My lord, no need to worry. Iron Man David slightly shook his metal head. The blue light in its eye sockets flickered non-stop, and it quickly said in the direction of Rokas. This is a small gift that Redditus made for me in order to celebrate his completion of the miniature Knight Titan and becoming a Mechanicus Magos. Although I am also grateful that he still remembers my small help to him, it does look rather ostentatious. Hearing Iron Man David's words, Rokas looked at the other party again. He shook his head slightly and said with a light smile, "No, David, I think it's just right. You look more like a big shot hiding behind the scenes manipulating everything." "Haha, my lord, you are joking. And judging from the number of these knight armors, you don't seem to have been idle either. Compared to me, you are the big shot who is beneficial to mankind." At this moment, Iron Man David, who quickly got up from the floating chair, shook his black skeleton with a metallic luster. It stepped off the floating chair, came to Rokas' side, and then bowed to the other party without hesitation and said, "Thank you for your hard work, my lord." And Rokas, who had been maintaining a smile on his face, did not choose to speak. He just slowly raised a vibranium palm, heavily patted Iron Man David's metal skeleton shoulder. After the emotions in his heart calmed down, Rokas, while greeting the night pilots who were slightly restrained and very curious about the unfamiliar environment, turned his head and asked Iron Man David, "David, how long have I been gone this time?" "My lord, about a year. After you left, our base and forces are steadily growing. After settling these night pilots, I will explain it to you in detail." Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, shook his metal head. It said to Rokas without concealing anything. And Rokas, with a smile on his face, took a deep breath. He was full of expectations for the development of the local forces now. Dash 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 dash. Buzzing. The floating chair, more than 3 meters high, was slowly traversing the spacious metal corridor. At this moment, Rokas, wearing vibranium power armor, was sitting on it, curiously studying this precious gift belonging to Iron Man David. He didn't have any petty thoughts of taking it for himself. It was purely a male creature's instinctive desire to explore mechanical creations. Not long after, accompanied by a familiar sound of footsteps, Iron Man David, shaking his black metal skeleton, slowly appeared at the end of the metal corridor. "My lord, the night pilots have been settled. Stormtroopers who are familiar with the internal and external situation of the base and are good at communication will be responsible for handling everything. Are you also interested in the floating chair?" According to Redditus, the inside of this floating chair is equipped with a shield generator belonging to the Terminator power armor, which has good defensive performance. The bottom is also equipped with Antarctic vibranium mechanical tentacles that can extend dozens of meters, and it is said that some alien technology belonging to the Necrons has also been installed by Redditus in a haphazard manner. Iron Man David stepped to the side of the floating chair. It shook its head and introduced to Rokas. Buzzing. In the next second, Rokas, who was randomly pressing on the metal handle, was suddenly completely enveloped by strands of more familiar, dazzling green light. And Rokas, who widened his eyes slightly, quickly raised a vibranium palm. He stared at the dazzling green light that seemed to surround his whole body, turned his head, and asked Iron Man David in confusion, "Is this some kind of Necron technology? What is its function?" "Hee, my lord, this is the most fun part. These green lights don't have any function at all. They are just special light effects emitted by a few Necron technological creations after they are connected to energy. It can be used to scare mortals." Iron Man David, who couldn't help shaking his metal head, spread out his metal palms and said with a slightly helpless tone, "Okay, I shouldn't have had too much hope for our tech priest. No, it should be Mechanicus Magos." Rokas, who subconsciously let out a sigh, moved his hand at will. The dazzling green light that almost enveloped his whole body completely dissipated. Not long after, Iron Man David accompanied the floating chair that was slowly floating forward and arrived at the brightly lit base hall. At this moment, the metal walls of the entire base hall were hung full of huge electronic screens. A large amount of data and images were constantly flashing by. Judging from the appearance alone, the entire base hall was more like a command center of a large organization than in the past. "My lord, which aspect of the report would you like to hear first?" Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, moved his feet. It stood in front of the floating chair and stared at Rokas and asked. And Rokas supported his cheek with a vibranium hand. He took a deep breath and said, "David, let's talk about it one by one according to your ideas. Anyway, I have some time to deal with internal affairs now." "Okay, my lord, then I will start with our gradually expanding sphere of influence. Iron Man David nodded and raised a metal finger and gently tapped his metal head. In an instant, rays of blue light slowly projected from its eye sockets, and quickly projected a complete Earth miniature in front of Roka's. And on the light blue real-world map, crimson light spots representing the Terra Astra Militarum almost covered every piece of land. In the following period, according to Iron Man David's constant narration, Roche gradually learned about the efforts and achievements of all team members in the past year. First, it is another expansion of the overall power. At present, Oceania and Europe, to a certain extent, except for not officially announcing the incorporation into the human empire, it is basically Rock's private territory. The unified conquest process of Oceania is relatively simple. Iron Man David only used the capital annexation and the dark methods of assimilation and brainwashing of the empire-heavy industries, and also won over the vast majority of the local dignitaries, and easily completed this task. The development of Europe, in fact, exceeded Iron Man David's expectations. Everything originated from the first batch of intelligence agents trained by Natasha and Hawkeye. Due to the order issued by Roche before, this batch of intelligence agents was immediately formed by Iron Man David into an intelligence department called Assassin, and was dispatched as soon as possible. Originally, Iron Man David's plan was to let the agents collect intelligence from various places, which would also increase the background and bargaining chips for the subsequent unification war. For example, in the early stage, they could infiltrate and lurk into official forces, and after gaining a certain degree of status, they could use money to buy off or assassinate to gradually reduce the resistance. However, as a series of intelligence content sent back to Twin Island base from Europe showed, those European countries that seemed to form a huge alliance of interests were simply a mess. And except for the nuclear counterattack systems of a few regional powers that deserve more attention, the military construction of the European Union can even be said to be a mess. If it weren't for the Terra Star Realm Legion's slightly improved reputation, and in order not to cause fear and resistance from the whole world, Iron Man David could have eliminated 99% of the leadership with just the Crying Sun's company performing decapitation missions. And for this special situation that exceeded data calculation and expectations, after careful calculation, Iron Man David immediately seized the opportunity. It transferred several Black Widows under Natasha and the remaining Winter Soldiers directly to the heart of Europe. Then, with the cooperation of the local intelligence department, Assassin, it quickly launched a series of bribery and assassination operations. In addition, with brainwashing persuasion, black material threats and many other shady methods, it turned most of the upper echelons of all the small European countries and several regional powers into mortal forces loyal to the Empire. Most surprisingly, Iron Man David also successfully sent Zola, the female Prime Minister of Latveria, to the European Union Parliament by exchanging interests with each other, and nominated the other party as the only candidate to compete for the next term of the Speaker of the Parliament. However, for this wonderful method of achieving remarkable results almost without bloodshed, Iron Man David, who shook his metal head slightly, had some different thoughts and judgments. My lord, the reason why this situation can be successfully achieved, I think that the calculation of intelligence information and the protection of the Emperor can be said to be indispensable, and even some luck is needed. But the most important thing is the depravity and corruption of the European Union itself, which completely exposed the image of being strong on the outside but weak on the inside. In fact, I never thought that conquering a continent would be so simple. Even the unification process of Oceania has had many twists and turns, but the people of Europe have given me a new understanding. This even made me secretly rejoice that the location of the last Chaos Descent did not appear in Europe, otherwise, what we would have to face would not only be Nurgle demons, but a large group of super wastes who could not help much and desperately held back. Moreover, apart from the population, land and some minerals, there is nothing else in Europe worth continuing to talk about. Even due to the erosion of various extreme cultural trends and the continuous relaxation in terms of systems, the local area has almost become an earthly paradise for various alien races, gangs, and even super-powered people. Currently, the Crying Sun's Third Company and the Stormtroopers' First Company are stationed in Europe in the name of the United Nations Security Council, and they use Latveria as a base of operations to radiate the entire continental plate. And according to the archived combat records, the current Crying Sun's Third Company has successfully witnessed alien races such as werewolves, black mages, tree demons, ogres, indigenous demons, etc., and it is said that in a certain Eastern European country, traces of the blood cult have been discovered again, that is to say, there will be no shortage of things like vampires. Of course, according to our habit, an Astartes squad has entered the local area to conduct reconnaissance operations. If support is needed, I will mobilize more combat power. Hehe, my lord, don't laugh yet, it's not over yet. The Stormtroopers' first company is now the Security Inquisitor of Europe. In addition to cleaning up gangs, they are also responsible for arresting criminal super-powered people, and choose to execute them on the spot or capture and brainwash them according to the degree of harm. Anyway, Raditz's heavy combat servo skulls can be said to be varied, and they have all kinds of superpowers. Also, do you know, the local media industry is actually preparing to launch a public opinion storm against the bloody and violent behavior of the Stormtroopers. I have no intention of intervening for the time being, but I want to see which guys still need the Astartes to come to their door to send warmth. Ah, by the way, Natasha has recently sneaked back to her hometown. That Security Council member state in Eastern Europe is not easy to deal with. They seem to really have a combat force composed of many super-powered people. More intelligence needs to be sent back before a judgment can be made. At this moment, Iron Man David talked a lot to Roche. And Roche, sitting on the floating seat, silently listened to everything. When Iron Man David temporarily retracted the projection in the air and planned to change the subject, he stared at Iron Man David in front of him and said, "This is also a kind of experience. With the continuous expansion of the territory, governing an organization and a continent or a country are two completely different concepts. Moreover, the local humans are not bumpkins who have never seen the world, and they will not kneel down and kowtow when the Emperor's angels have just descended. Unless we use force to implement a military management system, it will be difficult to gather real mobilization ability in people's hearts locally. If the subsequent progress is not smooth, then maintain the status quo for the time being. At most, choose some Eastern European countries with relatively poor living standards, such as Sokovia, to build a few production lines for equipment and vehicles to try to replicate the prosperity and stability of Latveria." As soon as Rock's voice fell, Iron Man David, who nodded slightly, immediately recorded his order. Then, it continued to tell Roche more news about the team members. For example, Quicksilver Comrade, the only living saint in the team and the Pope of the State Church. The other party is now leading a large group of survivors who lost their only home due to the descent of chaos, and is conducting a wounded but not dead guerrilla war with the official departments of the subcontinent. And Comrade Pietro's most outstanding action, it was to use the extreme speed ability enhanced by a special power armor to accidentally stir up a tornado, directly overturning more than a dozen police armored vehicles sent by the official. Thus, it completely became the Emperor's Storm Angel that a large number of believers passed down by word of mouth. Thank you for your support. If Pope Quicksilver became the spiritual leader of the poor out of necessity and being thrust into the position, then the performance and results of the following members were even more remarkable. Needless to say, Reditus's promotion to Mechanical Sage was a certainty. With Tony's assistance, a transaction, he successfully completed the design and finished product manufacturing of the miniature Night Titan prototype, and the entire production line was about to be completed. As for the Oil Maiden Sage, who was incompatible with Reditus, she also successfully completed the construction of the first Sky Carrier before Roche returned. Now, after obtaining permission from the Round Table Conference, she plans to also create a production line for the Castellan robots. Bucky, who had been in Japan for quite some time, met with Rogers, who had become the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., several times. He seemed to have regained the mental vitality to continue fighting. He not only openly admitted to everyone that Yukio had become his girlfriend, but also, under the arrangement of Iron Man David, he set off to the Hydra Island's mothership construction factory. Without many unexpected situations, Bucky, who is diligently studying various ship knowledge, will become the first acting captain of the Sky Carrier. Since the Latvian Naval Academy had just recruited its first batch of naval cadets, the task of controlling the Sky Carrier can only be handed over to an automatic servo robot formation for now. As for the Antarctic airport under construction, and the Cobra-class destroyer, unless Roche chooses to directly transfer naval crew members from the Empire, it will take some time to successfully set sail with local crew members. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, told Roche about Professor Connors and Dr. Banner's situation. Professor Connors, who had always lived in seclusion, had been diligently studying the Astartes, enhancement surgery and the gene seed specimens of the Star Knights. After Dr. Banner joined the team and came to Gemini Island base, the two middle-aged men with similar experiences quickly became close friends and research partners who could talk about anything. Dr. Banner helped Professor Connors analyze some difficult problems regarding the gene seed. Professor Connors used his scientific knowledge to help Dr. Banner study the specific uses of gamma rays. According to Iron Man David's description, if it hadn't temporarily stopped the two mad scientists who had fallen into a state of research, Dr. Banner even planned to inject the blood full of violent power in his body into the inactive gene seed, wanting to see if he could completely activate the gene seed with the Hulk's regenerative ability. At this moment, Roche, who heard this, narrowed his eyes slightly. A terrifying scene of a large group of Astartes in Hulk form rushing towards a large number of alien races seemed to appear before his eyes. Astartes Hulk, or Green Hulk, however, he, whose thoughts were wandering, did not choose to let Iron Man David completely seal this experiment. Instead, he earnestly told Iron Man David he could let Dr. Banner and Professor Connors continue to conduct some experiments. But without his permission or the Round Table Conference's permission, live experiments on Astartes were prohibited in Gemini Island base. At this moment, Iron Man David, who heard Rock's words, nodded slightly. Once again, he quickly recorded this shady order. Soon after, Roche, as if noticing that Iron Man David wanted to say something but hesitated, took a deep breath. He lowered his head and stared at Iron Man David in front of him and asked, "David, is there anything you want to say? If it's because of the order just now." "No, my lord, I think you misunderstood. I understand that the existence of some things is a necessary evil, and as your loyal steward, I always stand on your side, regardless of whether things are right or wrong. The thing I want to say is actually about Mr. Doom." In the next moment, Roche, who heard Iron Man David's words, was slightly stunned. He looked at the other party with a puzzled expression and said, "Doom, what happened to him?" Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, shook his metal head slightly. It said in a solemn tone, "Well, my lord, I'd better start from the beginning to avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings. Before you left the homeland, the last order you gave Mr. Doom was to retrieve the cosmic cube, so Mr. Doom was also executing this order and did not slack off in any way. And the problem lies in not slacking off. Because Nick Fury obtained great help from an alien race that can change its own form, Mr. Doom, who has discovered the other party's traces countless times, has repeatedly failed. Apart from destroying a few alien races used to divert attention, he has not gained anything. He himself seems to be too obsessed with this. He not only mobilized half of the Lamenter's company to stay on the American continent for a long time, but even his first witchcraft student, Ms. Wanda, has joined the search operation. Although I don't object to on-site teaching, Mr. Doom seems to have forgotten that he is still a national monarch and a team commander. I know that the space stone inside the cosmic cube is very important to the local humans and to you, but the more so, the more Mr. Doom needs to completely calm down. However, during the days you were away, I repeatedly asked Mr. Doom to temporarily return to Gemini Island base. It wouldn't be too late to dispatch after discovering the target's traces, but he refused with a tough attitude. This is not me, the team steward, complaining to you, but Mr. Doom has successfully exposed a small flaw in his personality, that is, he is too obsessed with the outcome of a certain thing, or perhaps there are some inside stories that we don't know. Moreover, just before you returned, I had already sent Miss Jessica, who had been slacking off for a long time, to the local area to restrict the other party's authority to act. The reason why I did not forcibly order the Lamenter's company to bring the other party back is also because I was worried that this would cause Mr. Doom to feel dissatisfied, thereby causing a difficult to end fierce conflict in the team. At this moment, Iron Man David's words made Roche frown slightly. He vaguely thought that other members of the team might cause some trouble and incidents. But he never thought that the most sensible Doom would have a problem. Although this matter may be big or small, I don't like Doom's attitude of not following orders. Where is he now? Roche, who slowly got up from the floating seat, took a deep breath and asked Iron Man David in a soft voice. Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, paused slightly. It still said in a deep voice to the Primarch in front of him. According to the geographical location where Nick Fury last appeared, they should all be in New York City now. New York, Staten Island. Accompanied by the low rumble of the deceleration engine, a black and white painted Thunderhawk transport slowly landed on the helipad of the Empire Heavy Industries building. Clang! The heavy hatch in the belly of the aircraft gradually lowered. A lithe figure clad in white sister of battle armor, with a master-crafted power scythe slung across her back, was the first to step out, her magnetic boots clicking onto the metal surface. At this moment, Jessica, her expression resolute, narrowed her eyes and gazed at the Empire Heavy Industries building not far away. She took a deep breath and immediately raised a ceramite gauntlet, waving it slightly. The next second, 5 stormtroopers wearing power armor and wielding standard-issue bolt guns quickly emerged from the interior of the aircraft. In just a few minutes later, the heavily armed combat squad completely ignored the reception specialists who were swarming up to greet them, as well as the security personnel attempting to block their path, and directly stormed into the brightly lit building lobby. Headquarters business, out of the way, or you will be shot without warning. At this moment, Jessica, her face as cold as ice, quickly scanned the ordinary employees, their expressions varying. Her ceramite hand had subconsciously moved to the plasma pistol at her waist, as if she would draw and fire at any moment. And after the gathered mortals wisely dispersed, Jessica, her eyes twitching slightly, led the combat squad towards the elevators without hesitation. Buzz buzz buzz, as extremely subtle mechanical whirring sounds echoed constantly in everyone's ears. The elevator carrying the combat squad quickly ascended to the top floor of the building. Soon after, the elevator doors slowly opened in front of everyone. Stepping forward, Jessica looked ahead. Just ahead, in a wide corridor with slightly dim light, a squad of Astartes in black and white power armor, fully armed, stood motionless like metal statues on the ground. When Jessica and the others gradually approached, the Astartes abruptly rotated their metal helmets, locking their occasionally glowing red lenses firmly onto the moving targets. Sister Jessica, Lord Doom has ordered that no one is to disturb him right now. At this moment, a Carcharodon, his bolter hanging at his side, immediately moved his magnetic boots. He raised a ceramite hand towards Jessica and the others, making a gesture to stop them from advancing. Please step aside, I am here to carry out Mr. David's orders, I must see Doom in person. Step aside, I'll say it again. At this moment, hearing the Carcharodon's deep voice, Jessica, her eyes twitching slightly, slowly took a deep breath. Her expression becoming even more indifferent, she unhesitatingly ordered the Astartes in front of her. However, the Carcharodon blocking the center of the corridor remained unmoved, his gaze piercing through the lenses as he stared at Jessica and the others, saying in a deep voice. Sorry, Sister Jessica, orders have a priority, we are now part of Lord Doom's combat force, and Mr. David has not sent us any orders, we cannot confirm the true purpose of your arrival. However, you can wait for Lord Doom. Thump thump thump. In an instant, before the Carcharodon could finish speaking, Jessica, her magnetic boots stomping heavily on the ground, suddenly levitated off the ground and quickly charged towards the front of the other party's towering body. The next second, a ceramite fist clenched tightly without any hesitation, heavily striking the Astartes' ceramite chestplate. Rumble, accompanied by a harsh sound of metal colliding. The towering Carcharodon was sent flying out like a ragdoll. Moreover, the entire person flew a distance of more than 10 meters before heavily crashing onto the ground. Almost at the same time, every Carcharodon present subconsciously raised the bolt guns in their palms. They locked their muzzles firmly on the lithe figure hovering in the middle of the corridor. However, the next second, the stormtroopers who had been following behind Jessica also quickly raised their bolt guns. They also aimed their muzzles at the metal helmets of every Astartes. However, even though the tense atmosphere at the moment had reached its peak, no one chose to pull the trigger, but only made a threatening offensive posture. Hey, you Carcharodons have guts. I said, this is a direct order from Mr. David. In the absence of the Primarch, Mr. David is the sole leader of the entire team. You can try shooting now, but I'm afraid you can't bear the consequences. Jessica, her eyes twitching a few times again, concealed the slightly trembling ceramite arm behind her back. Her eyes icy, she looked down at all the Astartes, and said in a deep voice. Clang! At this moment, as the heavy body of the Carcharodon who was getting up from the ground was quickly lifted by an invisible psychic force, a metal door at the end of the wide corridor instantly opened, completely breaking the fierce conflict about to erupt between the two sides. Jessica, The Astartes are just carrying out orders, why make things difficult for them? Besides, everyone knows you are Lord Lorgar's student. Facing the Primarch's only disciple, how would they dare to shoot? At this moment, Doom, draped in a dark green cloak, slowly stepped out of the dimly lit room that was exuding scarlet energy. He raised his hand and took off his metal helmet, using a pair of slightly tired eyes to stare at Jessica, and said calmly, "Don't try to put a hat on me, I dare not casually represent my teacher." Jessica, her whole body slowly landing on the ground, slightly curled the corners of her lips. She stared straight at Doom and said, "Also, you, Lord Doom, have such great authority, you have directly rejected the orders from headquarters several times. Do you know that Mr. David sent me here as a sign of great respect? Do you want to be tied back by the Astartes with bolt guns? I have already explained this matter to Mr. David, this is a direct order from Lord Lorgar, the priority is above everything else. Moreover, the target of the operation has colluded with a mysterious alien race that we have never known before. Isn't this more important than the transfer order from the Gemini Island base?" Doom, his expression indifferent, retorted to Jessica's questioning. He tried his best to explain to the other party in a gentle tone. However, Jessica, sizing Doom up and down, did not speak. She waved her hand to have the stormtroopers behind her put away their guns and stand by, then drove her power armor alone past the Astartes. After Jessica passed Doom without any hesitation and entered the dark room that was constantly gushing out scarlet energy. She quickly glanced inside, then turned her head to Doom, who was standing not far away, and said coldly, "You better give me a perfect explanation for what's inside here, or the next person to look for you will not be me, but my teacher." Presumptuous Lord Doom. Inside a dim room, scarlet energy surged and flowed continuously. A red-haired woman, clad in dark red nun armor, levitated cross-legged in midair, performing some bizarre and eerie witchcraft ritual with constantly changing, complex hand gestures. Centered around the red-haired woman, on the empty floor within 100 meters radius, more than 30 naked men and women, their skin surfaces of various colors, were forcibly engraved with countless mysterious patterns, maintaining rigid poses of kneeling and praying, completely becoming sacrifices for the entire witchcraft ritual. This is just an ancient divination witchcraft, and it is also a large-scale witchcraft ritual that I can barely complete only with the help of Wanda's magical abilities and the assistance of these sacrifices. Moreover, they are only in a state of coma and have not died. These people are all criminals with several lives on their hands. I am just temporarily using them to fill the numbers. I am not as deranged as you think. Even if you don't believe my explanation, you should believe the style of the Lamenters, right? If I randomly capturing people for sacrifice grab people for sacrifice, I'm afraid the bomb would fall on me. At this moment, Doom, whose dark green cloak moved without wind, stepped forward, propelled by his power armor. He gazed at Jessica, whose expression had gradually softened, with eyes that remained calm. "Even if what you say is true, Doom, what exactly are you doing? I do know the importance of the cosmic cube from David, but what can a mere mortal agent do, even with the help of an alien race? He can't escape our grasp now. Is it worth repeatedly defying David's orders, even risking having your head crushed by my teacher? Moreover, you witnessed those chaos demons a year ago, right? Even if this is just a witchcraft ritual, matters involving blood sacrifices are a well-known taboo to all of us. Even if David and I help you conceal this time, have you considered the real consequences if Lord Roach finds out?" Jessica exhaled, her expression gradually becoming serious. She looked at Doom, who was close at hand, and said earnestly, "Jessica, I am very grateful for the trust you and Mr. David have in me, but I don't intend to hide this matter. If Lord Roach returns, I will tell him everything in detail, and I will bear all the consequences alone. As for why I am doing this, in fact, at first, it was indeed because I was played by a mortal agent several times, and I had some emotional obsession. But later, I inadvertently learned from the mouth of a dying alien that Nick Fury is not only evading our pursuit, he is even trying to activate the cosmic cube. And according to the truth that Lord Roach once told me, the cosmic cube actually contains the space stone, and this space stone, which involves cosmic rules, can open a portal to anywhere in the universe, or randomly teleport the stone holder away. You must remember, it's anywhere in the universe. Jessica, you don't think our universe only has this one dimension of reality, do you? Do you remember the witchcraft flames I often use? That is a magical substance from the edge of hell, and that is just a fragment of a dimension without any master. As for the hell dimensions that are truly recorded in human myths and legends, I am afraid that only the supreme mage who has never been seen can venture to set foot in. And according to the witchcraft knowledge I have learned over the years, terrifying dimensions like hell are as numerous as grains of sand on a beach. If Nick Fury just escapes by activating the cosmic cube, that's fine. We will simply lose the opportunity to obtain the space stone, but if the other party accidentally opens a portal to those unknown dimensions, who knows what will come out of it? Not to mention that the other party is now colluding with the alien race. Are we going to gamble on luck or expect a low-character agent to show his conscience? At this moment, Doom unreservedly told Jessica his judgment and the facts he knew. And Jessica gradually fell into a state of shock from the initial incomprehension and doubt. Chi. Just at this moment, as strands of scarlet energy inside the room once again set off energy ripples like undulating waves. The divination witchcraft ritual seemed to have reached its end. Is the ritual about to end? However, just as Jessica was completely distracted by the sudden changes in the surrounding environment. Doom's originally calm eyes flickered slightly. It seemed that the other party had deliberately concealed some things and had not been completely honest with Jessica. Gotcha. Soon after, all the scarlet energy quickly returned to Wanda's body like tired birds returning to their nests. It also allowed her, who was levitating in midair, to slowly land on the ground. And Jessica and Doom, who looked at each other, immediately stepped forward, propelled by their power armor, and surrounded Wanda. Teacher, the divination witchcraft is over. I think we have finally found their last hiding place. Wanda, who had just opened her eyes, said excitedly to Doom. If I'm not mistaken, they are on Manhattan Island, hiding in a huge space located deep underground, and it is full of gravel and collapsed metal structures. Underground, the New York sewer system. At this moment, Doom frowned slightly upon hearing Wanda's words, muttering to himself. However, at this time, Jessica, who couldn't help but widen her eyes, knelt down on one knee. She stared straight at Wanda, who was a little shy, and asked, Wanda, little sister, do you feel that the appearance of that underground space, and the metal structure, look a little familiar? Like you've seen it somewhere before. I do have that illusion, but how did you know? Do you also have divination-type superpowers? Wanda, with a dazed look, shook her head full of red hair slightly. She looked at Jessica in front of her and asked, Oh dear, this is really... At this moment, Jessica's expression changed several times, and she subconsciously clenched her teeth. She first stared at Wanda in front of her, then turned her head to look at Doom, whose expression had become serious. Before you two joined the team, the location of the first base built by Mr. David was underground on Manhattan Island. That damn Nick Fury is actually playing, hiding in plain sight, hiding in our old home. Manhattan Island, deep underground. In the base hall, most of the structure had collapsed, but a large, clean area had been completely cleared. Even the metal floor, riddled with cracks, was piled high with equipment and supplies. Accompanied by the occasional low hum, a rhomboid mechanical creation, alien in its technological design, was continuously transmitting massive amounts of energy through thick cables that connected to the depths of the base hall corridor. Under the dim light cast by some of the surviving light fixtures. In a dark corner filled with various supplies, a middle-aged black man with a black leather trench coat draped over his shoulders sat in a daze. A half-smoked cigar was casually held in one hand resting on his knee, with wisps of smoke rising from the glowing tip. In his other palm, suspended in midair, a box of what appeared to be protein-synthesized food had long solidified into an unidentifiable mass. Mr. Fury, are you not satisfied with our synthesized food? Should we find you some edible human food? At that moment, a tall figure with pointed ears and rough, green skin slowly entered the base hall from the corridor. Behind him, dozens of nearly identical-looking alien beings were methodically assembling some kind of large-scale transmission device. Don't be so polite, old friend. Nick Fury, seemingly jolted back to reality, raised his dark face, which appeared noticeably older. He slightly shook his bald head, and said to the approaching green-skinned alien, The situation outside is too dangerous. Those guys are chasing us too closely, and I was just subconsciously recalling some past experiences. It's not the food. It's good that you don't mind. After all, we Skrulls only have the concept of filling our stomachs or supplementing nutrition when it comes to food culture, and Earth's food culture is like a fairy tale to us. The Skrull, stepping forward, revealed a smile on his slightly ugly green face. The older alien walked to Nick Fury and leaned his back against a pile of supplies, saying in a low voice, "Mr. Fury, the energy transmission device for activating the Tesseract is almost complete. If everything goes smoothly, without any unexpected circumstances, we can leave Earth and even the solar system in 12 hours at most. Do you have any plans for your future life as a cosmic wanderer?" Hearing the alien old friend's question at this moment, Nick Fury, taking a deep drag from his cigar, exhaled the pungent smoke and said with a self-deprecating tone, "Just over a year ago, I was still the supreme leader of a vast intelligence organization. The things I had to worry about every day, besides the acid review teams from above, were where we needed to go to deal with special events. But now, I'm just a world-class fugitive being chased around by a bunch of murderous terrorists, like a rat scurrying across the street. Future plans, I don't seem to have ever thought about it. I always thought I would serve SHIELD's ideals until I died in the director's seat, becoming a hero people would remember." At this moment, Nick Fury's voice seemed to gradually fade. In the end, he could only turn all his melancholy into a sigh. Then, Nick Fury took another deep drag from the nearly burnt-out cigar, forcefully swallowing it deep into his throat. "Forget it, those are all things of the past. Now that I think about it, there were indeed some things I didn't do perfectly, and even many problems arose. No wonder I ended up in a situation where everyone betrayed me. Mr. Fury, you also know about our Skrull's shapeshifting abilities, so some of your memories are also in my mind. I can't say I fully understand how you feel now, but what I want to say is, perhaps changing the way you live is also a good choice for a race like humans with short lifespans. The entire universe is vast, and countless magnificent planets and alien races that humans have never seen will become your most profound life memories. We Skrulls are losers and cosmic wanderers who have been expelled from our home planet, but only by being more optimistic can we survive better, right?" The Skrull, with a faint smile on his lips, persuaded Nick Fury beside him. Hearing the alien old friend's comforting words, Nick Fury hesitated slightly, then turned his head and said solemnly to him, "Talos, I'm very sorry that some of your people paid the price of their lives because of me. Maybe the best choice for me would have been to face death directly." "Mr. Fury, what are you saying? If Ms. Danvers knew that those of us who stayed on Earth did not save her few human friends, then how would the Skrull Wanderers, who have enjoyed Ms. Danvers' protection for decades, face their guardian? Moreover, we Skrulls have always been very dissatisfied with the Terra Stellar Army's global declaration, but we just haven't had a suitable opportunity to launch a strong counterattack." "That's right, Earth is the mother planet of the human race, but it's not just a human planet. A mere Terra Stellar Army cannot represent the overall openness and consensus of humanity." At this moment, hearing the words of the Skrull Talos, Nick Fury, slightly shaking his dark bald head, couldn't help but sigh. Yes, if the human race wants to enter the cosmic era, step out of Earth and become an interstellar race, then they must have a guide familiar with all the rules. In fact, I originally hoped that you Skrulls could become humanity's teachers, teaching us to learn the codes of conduct and rules among cosmic races. Otherwise, with human nature, even if we become an interstellar race, we may inadvertently bring about an unbearable disaster. This is also one of the reasons why I tried to use the Tesseract's endless energy to develop super weapons, to give humanity a vital bargaining chip for negotiating with or even fighting back against countless alien races. I even had an Avengers initiative that I didn't have time to carry out. What a pity, everything fell short." Just as Nick Fury finished speaking, the Skrull Talos, with his arms crossed, also shook his head slightly and sighed. However, just as he wanted to continue discussing the topic with his old friend, boom boom boom, at that moment, a series of extremely familiar explosive sounds faintly echoed in everyone's ears. The next second, Nick Fury, suddenly widening his eyes, instantly jumped up from the ground. His fingertips trembling slightly, he immediately turned his head to look at Talos, whose expression had become serious, and roared almost through gritted teeth. They've still caught up. A plasma pistol that never overheats continuously spat out extremely scorching plasma spheres from its muzzle. Several meters away, a concrete wall about half a meter thick was silently melted open, creating a terrifying hole more than a person tall, and a large amount of dark red, scorching magma continuously flowed onto the ground, gathering into a pool of orange-red high-temperature liquid. Immediately afterward, invisible psionic powers and strands of scarlet energy successively emerged into the air. In the blink of an eye, the hole, which could barely allow one person to pass, was quickly widened into a broad entrance more than 3 meters high, also revealing a dark space located behind the entrance. At this moment, Jessica had just put away the plasma pistol. Then, casually drawing a master-crafted scythe from behind her power pack, Jessica slightly shook her metal helmet. She held the close combat weapon with both hands and said in a muffled voice through the communication channel to Doom and Wanda, who were standing around. The route of the old base is not complicated, but I estimate that most of the passages inside have collapsed. If there are no special circumstances, do not change the route and direction at will. It is best to follow me for safety's sake. After all, I have lived here for a long time. Jessica, you underestimate the combat capabilities of the Astartes. Let them do what they are best at. Jessica's words had not yet finished. Doom, whose dark green cloak fluttered slightly, suddenly raised a ceramite steel palm. And as he issued the complex hand signals for the infiltration operation, 2 fully armed Crying Suns assault squads quickly activated their power armor. Remaining silent, they began a cautious infiltration operation into the pitch-black interior of the base. Facing Doom's words, Jessica, wearing a metal helmet, did not show any emotional fluctuations. She stood in place and remained silent for a moment. She also raised her hand to signal the stormtrooper squad behind her to enter the dimly lit interior of the base and begin the infiltration operation. Teacher, this is probably where those alien xenomorphs are hiding. Their shapeshifting abilities are excellent. We can't distinguish the real from the fake with our naked eyes and augury devices. So what do we do when we encounter the mission objective? Do we leave them alive? Just then, Wanda, after hesitating a few times, suddenly gazed at Doom's tall figure and asked softly. And Doom, who was stepping forward, said without turning his head. Now Nick Fury is a secondary target. It doesn't matter whether we leave them alive or not. The most important thing is to retrieve the Tesseract. Remember one thing, Wanda, do not harbor any sympathy for any alien races. They are not worth your wasted effort. I don't want to see the mistake you inadvertently made last time again, understand? As soon as Doom's voice fell, Wanda, who quickly activated her power armor to follow, vigorously nodded her metal helmet. As she stepped forward, she quickly raised her 2 ceramite steel palms beside her. In an instant, strands of scarlet energy continuously wrapped around her metal fingertips. About a dozen minutes later, 3 wide passages with metal floors covered with rubble and metal structures appeared within the visors of the group. And just as Doom and Wanda, under Jessica's guidance, were planning to use invisible psionic powers and scarlet energy to clear one of the passages, making the infiltration plan smoother. CHZZ. Accompanied by a series of sharp buzzing vibrations that suddenly pierced the air. Metal spikes, like sharp arrows, were shot straight at Wanda, whose power armor was the most conspicuous. In an instant, Wanda, whose fingertips were wrapped in strands of scarlet energy, immediately stopped countless metal spikes in front of her. But before she could launch a necessary counterattack, Jessica, who was striving to activate her power armor, swung the master-crafted power scythe in her hands. Without hesitation, she launched a swift and astonishing charge towards the direction from which the sneak attack had just been launched. At this moment, the sound of heavy magnetic boots stomping on the metal floor seemed to make some of the surrounding rubble and metal structures totter. And just as Jessica was about to reach the vicinity of the target, a tall figure whose appearance was exactly the same as Nick Fury himself, but whose facial expression was more ferocious, and who was continuously condensing a large number of metal spikes above his 2 palms, quickly darted out of his hiding place and charged head-on towards Jessica's front. However, the next second, a master-crafted scythe with a sharp blade and a shimmering azure decomposition field had already arrived near the opponent several seconds in advance. Poochie, accompanied by a muffled sound of cutting into hard flesh, the expression on the face of Nick Fury, who was still condensing more metal spikes, suddenly changed. Die, xenomorph. Jessica, whose muffled roar vaguely erupted from beneath her metal helmet, instantly stepped forward. The master-crafted power scythe, tightly gripped in her palm, also passed through the chest and abdomen of Nick Fury, without any hesitation. Poochie. After countless blue blood splattered on the ceramite steel armor, and the incomplete corpse, split in 2, also fell heavily to the ground. A pointed-eared, green-skinned alien race that Jessica had never seen before was clearly revealed within her visor range. Pointed-eared green skin, is this the so-called shapeshifting ability? Looks like it's useless. Jessica, who couldn't help but complain, subconsciously shook her metal helmet, then lowered her head and vigorously flicked off the blue blood on her body a few times. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. However, the next second, more energy-like superpowers. For example, ice spikes and lightning fireballs instantly emerged in the air. Then, they quickly launched a continuous and terrifying bombardment towards everyone present. Jessica, be careful of the xenomorph's energy attacks and armor-piercing ammunition. Ordinary ceramite steel armor, especially the helmet, can't withstand it for too long. Everyone, immediately form a defensive formation. Look for opportunities to counterattack. At this moment, 2 ceramite steel palms were raised rapidly. Doom, who began to emit beams of impact light towards the surrounding hidden locations, instantly issued a loud warning to Jessica. At the same time, the Crying Sun's assault squad and the Stormtrooper squad, who successively raised their bolters, also suddenly pulled the triggers against the xenomorph enemies who reappeared. Boom boom boom. More than 20 Nick Furies, who were trying to hide behind cover and launch an attack, were completely torn into a sky full of flying blue flesh by the roaring bolters. Only some alien races who reacted quickly and successfully lowered their bodies were lucky enough to avoid the first round of shooting. However, just as everyone present was planning to wipe out these alien races in one fell swoop. Dong dong dong, accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps approaching from far away, and countless large-caliber armor-piercing bullets suddenly streaking across the air. A large group of Nick Furies, who had obviously displayed flesh system superpowers, quickly rushed out of a wide passage and launched a charge assault towards the battle formation that had just been formed. Boom boom boom. The next moment, every Astartes and Stormtrooper drew a roaring chainsword or power sword from the back of their power packs. Continuously firing, they quickly activated their power armor, like raging trains that had just started, and launched a fearless countercharge towards the oncoming alien races. For Roxia, several hours ago, at the blizzard-swept Changzi Island base, a Thunderhawk transport aircraft parked on the flight deck was emitting a low, rumbling roar as its powerful engines started up. Inside the cockpit, Iron Man David expertly manipulated the sophisticated equipment, ready for takeoff at any moment. Thump, 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 accompanied by the sound of magnetic boots striking the metal floor. Rogel Dorn, clad in his vibranium power armor, slowly entered the dimly lit cabin. Just a few minutes prior, he had finished his conversation with the Mechanicus sage, Reditus, and handed over the metal module containing a vast amount of weapon and heavy vehicle design blueprints. The almost unconcealed fervor of the servo skull, and the endless stream of flattering words directed at Rogel Dorn, were enough to prove the value of the item. However, after Reditus gradually calmed down from his excitement, he mysteriously, yet awkwardly, told Rogel Dorn that he had also prepared a gift for the Primarch, to celebrate his promotion to Mechanicus Sage. However, because Rogel Dorn had returned too early, some of the finishing touches had not yet been completed, so he was temporarily unable to present it to Rogel Dorn. Rogel Dorn didn't particularly care about this. Instead, he encouraged Reditus to take his time and prepare it more thoroughly. My lord, according to the information continuously transmitted back by the Lamenters and Doom, Jessica, they should have located Nick Fury's hideout, and have led several combat squads to infiltrate it. Hey, to think he chose the ruins of the underground base we initially built, after it was destroyed, as a safe house. It has to be said that it was an extremely audacious decision. Iron Man David said to Rogel Dorn without turning his head as he closed the Thunderhawk transport's cargo door. Rogel Dorn, clad in his vibranium power armor, sat down on the metal seat. He casually waved his hand. One by one, the metal 10 rings suspended behind the power pack neatly slid onto the outside of his vibranium arm. Or rather, it was a clever decision, because only there can a rat hiding from everyone barely conceal itself. Let's go, David, hopefully, when the Thunderhawk arrives over New York. Doom and the others will personally deliver the Tesseract into my palm. After that, I will have a good discussion with him about what it means to follow orders. Rogel Dorn slowly closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He said faintly to the cockpit where Iron Man David was buzzing. The next second, as the Thunderhawk transport aircraft's engines roared to life, and the huge deck above the flight platform gradually opened. The massive metal fuselage quickly faced the swirling snow and flew into the dim sky. Dash 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 dash. Boom boom boom. A chainsword with a roaring motor relentlessly cut into the chest of a Nick Fury. The rapidly rotating sharp teeth caused a terrifying transformation on the black face, as if solid matter was liquefying. In the blink of an eye, a large number of different human faces constantly appeared and disappeared. Until the other party's entire upper body was sawn in half by the chainsword, the green-skinned, pointy-eared alien form was completely exposed to the air. Crack! The next moment, a metal iron fist wrapped in ceramite armor slammed out with a speed that was difficult to discern with the naked eye. It shattered the head of another, Nick Fury, who tried to pounce with just one punch. The Astartes, showing no mercy to the alien race, abruptly activated the power armor and stepped forward. The roaring chainsword, with traces of blue flesh on its sharp teeth, continued to hack at the next alien target. At this moment, the cruel slaughter, with almost the exact same results, was constantly being repeated in the underground passage. These alien races that can freely change shape, and can use superpowers may be a disaster for ordinary armies. But for the knowledgeable Astartes lamenters, except for some energy-based superpowers that can quickly damage ceramite armor, posing a considerable threat. Most of the enemy's attack methods are completely futile acts of suicide. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. At this moment, a series of large-caliber armor-piercing bullets, under the cover of countless energy flashes, sinisterly streaked across the dimly lit air. Then, more armor-piercing bullets swept towards the Astartes who were desperately slaughtering the alien races. However, before the most deadly armor-piercing bullets could land on their intended targets, strands of scarlet energy quickly spread to the top of everyone's heads, forming a thick protective barrier, easily blocking the enemy's continuous fire coverage. The next second, Jessica, who had just floated into the air, rotated her helmet's eyepiece. She immediately clenched the Artificer Power Scythe in her palm. Her whole body was like a metal cannonball that had just been fired, launching a more ferocious dive attack towards the firing position deep in the passage. In an instant, fireballs burst, frost spread, and the blue light of the Artificer Power Scythe danced back and forth in the air. The overlapping echoes of a large number of severed limbs and painful wails even gradually suppressed the roar of the chainswords. Before long, all the sounds seemed to weaken completely. And on the ground, which was already covered in blue blood, there were no more alien races that could stand up. At this moment, Doom, who had quickly scanned around with his eyepiece, waved his hand. Terrifying hellfire directly burned countless alien corpses. Then, without saying a word, he gently pointed to one of the underground passages. Those Astartes from the Lamenters instantly activated their power armor, which was covered in battle damage. They unhesitatingly continued to delve deeper in the direction the enemy had come from. At the same time, Jessica, whose feet were floating off the ground again, abruptly changed her flight direction. She carried the Artificer Power Scythe, covered in blue blood, tightly following behind the Astartes squad. A few minutes later, the people who were advancing gradually slowed down their pace. And some of the lights that had not been damaged occasionally appeared inside the originally pitch-black wide passage, constantly emitting a faint light. After everyone carefully turned a corner in the passage, an alien mechanical creation as tall as several meters was clearly presented in the range of everyone's eyepieces. At the same time, a dozen green-skinned, pointy-eared alien races were surrounding a serious-looking middle-aged black man. And that was the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the current black dog in the water, Nick Fury, whom Doom and the others had been chasing for a long time. People of the Terra Astartes Legion, stop all your actions immediately. Did you see this? This mechanical device from the Skrull race has been connected to the Tesseract, although it has never been able to transmit us away from Earth due to missing parts, but once I completely activate the Tesseract as an energy source, the terrifying energy shock generated will kill everyone present. Dong. In an instant, parts of the ceramite armor emitted dull collision sounds. The Astartes in one assault squad immediately knelt on one knee in firing stances. They re-gripped the bolters hanging at their waists, then raised the muzzles, aiming at Nick Fury not far away. Another squad of Carcharodons also swiftly raised their bolters, unhesitatingly targeting every alien race around him. At this moment, Jessica, slowly levitating in the middle of the tunnel, didn't speak rashly. Through her helmet's optics, she was constantly scanning the sizable alien mechanical construct, trying to find any flaws. At the same time, she was secretly analyzing the veracity of the other party's words about mutually assured destruction. However, strangely enough, the stormtrooper squad that had been following Jessica hadn't revealed their towering figures yet. Nick Fury, as a member of the human race, you collude with alien races, remain unrepentant, and even try to reactivate the Tesseract. Do you say you did it on purpose? Or was it an accident? Just then, Doom, his dark green cloak billowing, led his apprentice, Wanda, clad in red sororitas armor, slowly to the rear of the combat squad. His icy gaze, through the helmet's optics, stared at Nick Fury, whose expression was almost numb, and said in a deep voice, "Let's cut to the chase. Do you really think you can leave here alive today?" As soon as Doom's words fell, Nick Fury, on that dark face with stiff muscles, couldn't help but reveal a sneer, blinking his bloodshot eyes and saying in a deep voice, "Heh, I once thought I was a radical human supremacist, but compared to the cruel actions of your Terra Astartes Legion, I've almost become a complete joke. Yes, you people are strong and powerful, can do whatever you want, and even have weapons and equipment far surpassing Earth's technology as a backing for your recklessness. But do you even understand that the measuring scale of the entire universe is too vast, and all the achievements we humans have are too insignificant? Do you know how many alien races there are in the entire universe? How many alien life forms are far more powerful than Earth and even you? Their dominion probably has to be calculated in light years. And we humans haven't even stepped out of the solar system. The Sheer Empire, the Kree Empire, the Skrulls, the Asgardians, the Eternals, cosmic parasites, symbiotes, facing so many ancient alien races that the human race can hardly reach. Does your Terra Astartes Legion intend to enter the cosmic era with this kind of extremely xenophobic and foolish ideology? Wake up. If our human race doesn't have a qualified guide, without the help of these pacifist Skrulls, then the first day of becoming an interstellar race will be our complete extermination, turning us into a speck of dust in the universe." At this moment, even Nick Fury's dark face gradually flushed red due to his overly excited emotions. He almost shouted hoarsely at Doom and the others, and finally even let out a deafening roar. Tisk tisk. However, at this time, Doom, who had been listening quietly, seemed to shake his metal helmet slightly. An indifferent voice, indistinguishable as mockery or sarcasm, gradually emanated from outside the helmet. "I originally thought you would have some more profound insights, but I didn't expect it to be this kind of unoriginal cliché again. Do you really think in your heart that we are a bunch of ignorant human bumpkins, killing wantonly for our own interests? Instead, you, who secretly colluded with aliens, heard some gossip fed to you by others, and overnight completely awakened, becoming a soft-kneed human savior. Heh, stop kidding. You who chose to collude with aliens have already betrayed the interests of humanity itself. You don't really believe that an alien race that can set foot on Earth would mercifully help the human race, do you? Why don't you ask these green-skinned aliens beside you now? Ask them if they believe they will wholeheartedly assist the human race in entering the cosmic era. Still want us to wake up? I'm afraid you need to wake up and wash your brain. Now, let me tell you a fundamental law in the cosmic scale. That is, every race will only regard the interests of its own race as the most important thing. And you, who think so highly of yourself, are never a pioneer of human awakening, or the only savior. You are just a heretical traitor like a rat crossing the street, chased and beaten by everyone. Astartes, tell him now, who is the real human pioneer? At this moment, Doom's impassioned words had not completely fallen. Every Astartes present roared in a low voice without hesitation. Even Jessica, who had been levitating in the air, diligently observing the enemy, waiting for an opportunity to attack, subconsciously raised the master-crafted scythe in her palm above her head. Primarch, hail Rebute, tell them, who is the true savior of mankind? For the Emperor, for Sanguinius. At this moment, the deafening roars of the Astartes echoed continuously in the depths of the spacious underground tunnel. It even gradually formed a continuous overlapping echo that spread to farther places. At this moment, all the green-skinned aliens, including Nick Fury, their faces rapidly changed with indescribable expressions, and it was unclear whether it was because of shock or fear. Nick Fury, I have given the final answer for all of us. Now, hand over the Tesseract, and I can give you a quick and painless death. Along with the icy voice that once again resounded throughout the underground tunnel, the dark green cloak on Doom's towering body gradually moved without wind. His two ceramite hands also secretly formed a sorcerous gesture. Subsequently, Doom actually slowly drove his power armor forward, and as the sound of the magnetic boots, like heavy drumbeats, fell on the violently beating hearts of Nick Fury and the others, the tragic aura that the other party deliberately displayed, wanting to perish together, was gradually suppressed. Stop, did you hear me? I fucking told you to stop. At this moment, Nick Fury, who gradually came back to his senses, took a deep breath. He suddenly widened his bloodshot eyes. The numb expression on that dark face gradually became ferocious. Do you think I'm bluffing? Do you think your Terra Astartes Legion already has victory in hand? Before Nick Fury could finish speaking, Doom, who had suddenly stopped his forward steps, suddenly interrupted the other party's words. Nick Fury, haven't you realized it yet? Actually, I've been stalling for time with you. Do it. At this moment, as Doom's icy voice quickly echoed in everyone's ears. In the depths of the base hall, not far behind Nick Fury and the dozen or so green-skinned aliens, 5 stormtroopers wearing support power armor silently revealed their towering figures in a state of lurking. At the same time, strands of scarlet energy also closely adhered to the ground, spreading forward, covertly extending to the front, back, left, and right of the alien mechanical construct. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.